на коліно, своє полкове знамено. Дивлюсь на нього я востаннє, у нез'ясованій журбі. Всю кров мою, всі скитання, воно вібрало у собі. Всю кров мою, всі скитання, воно вібрало у собі. Відвагу нашу нашій волі, загиблих друзів імена. Читаю нашого вімолі, я полкового знамена. Дивлюсь на нього я востаннє, у нез'ясованій журбі. Всю кров мою, всі скитання, воно вібрало у собі. Всю кров мою, всі скитання, воно вібрало у собі. Усе, що разом пережито, в походах вистраждано все. Я знаю, інші гордовито прапороносець понесе. Дивлюсь на нього я востаннє, у нез'ясованій журбі. Всю кров мою, всі скитання, воно вібрало у собі. Всю кров мою, всі скитання, воно вібрало у собі.
Крутые парни по всей стране, кто связан дружбой с ВДВ. Такое братство, надежный щит, никто Россию не победит. ВДВ, с неба привет, ультрамариновый набок берет. Денег с волной и море погон, с неба навеки десант обручен. ВДВ, сколько побед, из парашютов белый букет. Радугой мирной парят купола, слава десанту, честь и хвала. В Центральном парке салют в Москве, мечтают парни о ВДВ. Любым оружием владеть легко, знамя победы главней всего. ВДВ, с неба привет, ультрамариновый набок берет. Денег с волной и море погон, с неба навеки десант обручен. ВДВ, сколько побед, из парашютов белый букет. Радугой мирной парят купола, слава десанту, честь и хвала. Честь и хвала. В горячих точках, в горах, лесах атаку вихрем ведет десант, срываясь ливнем внезапно вниз. И только ставка по жизни жизнь. ВДВ, с неба привет, ультрамариновый навык берет. Тельник с волной и море погон, с С неба навеки десант обручен. ВДВ, сколько побед, из парашютов белый букет. Радугой мирный поряд купола. Слава десанту, честь и хвала. ВДВ, с неба привет, ультрамариновый навык берет. Тельник с волной и море погон. С неба навеки десант обручен. ВДВ, сколько побед, из парашютов белый букет. Радугой мирный поряд купола. Слава десанту, честь и хвала. Честь и хвала. Честь и хвала. Честь и хвала.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пихцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer. I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 180 and 181 of the stream.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 48 hours of the war in Ukraine. But before I start off tonight, and also beyond that voice crack, let me tell y'all about last Sunday's fundraiser. So, give me just a second, everyone. I'm actually going to pull up the exact figure we got on that fundraiser, just so that way everyone can know. So, let me hop over here real quick, and let me scroll down. Good lord, I don't know who did this, but I just saw that the fundraiser has reached $14,520.97, and so somehow, in between the stream ending and the 30 minutes that was left on it, it got another $520 put towards the fundraiser, bringing us up to around $416,000 total raised amongst all of our fundraisers. Every single one of them. That is worth a massive yeehaw. So, Matthew, can you blow out your vocal cords at the very first few minutes of the stream? And then he just blew them out. He'll be suffering for the rest of the night. But this is huge news. And we're getting closer and closer each fundraiser to the $500,000 mark. We're about to be at $500,000 in funds raised for Ukraine, and I just want everyone to know, once again, just in case if you are new to the stream, and just in case if in the future someone is in the live chat and you see them asking, well, where do these funds go? I want to explain something real quick about the YouTube Give system again. Now, I know that this is not tonight's news, but I still feel it's incredibly important to explain what YouTube Give is. When you see here, donate to a nonprofit with YouTube Giving. Apparently, they call it YouTube Giving on Google, but on my interface, it's called YouTube Give. YouTube Giving is designed to help strengthen the way creators and fans interact with charitable giving on YouTube. Some videos and live streams give you the option to donate to a nonprofit that the video creator is supporting. And according to Google, and Google owns YouTube, YouTube covers all transaction fees. So 100% of the money you donate goes to the eligible nonprofit. Donations to nonprofits are, sadly, in case if you input the wrong amount, non-refundable. But still, I want y'all to just know and remember, just in case we have people coming through, because there are, of course, a lot of people just roaming around. We've had a lot of them hop in the Discord that sit there and say, hey, you know, like, go support this random thing through a PayPal, and no one really knows where it's going. And so I wanted to make sure to remind y'all that the only way we run fundraisers and we raise support for Ukraine under any circumstances is through YouTube Give only. And it will go directly to a nonprofit that has been confirmed to be safe and actually take care of the funds. That's something I find incredibly important, is to be trustworthy and transparent with fundraising, and hopefully y'all appreciate that, because I go through huge means and bounds, and thank God YouTube helps us out a lot with that to make sure that when y'all support Ukraine, it actually gets there. So with that, we're now going to be moving on into the news for tonight, and the Russians are a little angry. Now, who are they angry at? That's really hard to say, actually. Are they angry at themselves? Are they angry at Ukraine? As y'all may have known last week, Darya Dugina, the daughter of Dugin himself, who's considered an advisor to Putin, was killed in a car bombing. As far as we've been able to confirm, and I believe the Russian investigative agencies have confirmed, it was done by some kind of a Russian Republican Army, which according to the Russians is a terrorist organization, and to the rest of us, I assume they would be called freedom fighters. Regardless, they had a funeral today, and I actually did see someone bring this up earlier in the live chat, and I thought it was a great point. Her funeral was open casket. And I don't know about you, Matthew, but I've actually seen some pictures of people who were caught in car bombings and burned alive during the Troubles in the United Kingdom. And I've got to tell you, they weren't in good enough condition to have an open casket. And of course, we don't deal in conspiracy theories on this channel, so I'm not going to try and build some giant elaborate web of what may be happening. I'm just saying it's incredibly odd that someone who was inside of a car that pretty much burned itself to rubble was somehow able to have an open casket funeral. And from the pictures that I saw, which I cannot show on stream because of course it's a dead body, They looked pretty good, so I don't know what's going on there, but I'll let y'all's imagination run wild with that. I won't try and make any large and giant leaps of assumptions there. Anyways, moving into Moscow, while the Russians seem to be lashing out at the Ukrainians for this attack on Dugina's daughter, which we'll get to later on in tonight's news, it also seems that there's Russians who are angry against the Russian government, and they're still making it vocal to this day, although they know that they'll be arrested for it. This guy had enough of the Russian anthem, and he decided to show it off in front of a massive demonstration at a war memorial. So here's the video of this. It is hilarious, actually. Enough of that. It's comical how he throws it, and as soon as it hits the ground, the music just stops right here. The cops come running out of nowhere to come get him.
Guys, is that their only speaker?
Yeah, apparently it was their only speaker. It kind of tells you how bad the sanctions are hitting him, that they can only get one speaker for this event. But anyways, the guy just, after he threw the speaker, he just starts walking up to the microphone like a total badass. I mean, like, he's just, like, in a nice little saunter there. And the little cop with the billy club's running up, and he's just gonna grab him and lightly push him away. And now here's another thing. While we can see that this Russian guy is pissed and doesn't like what the Russian government's doing at all, you can hear a lot of people in the crowd actually pick up the Russian anthem and start singing it. So of course, it's not a black and white picture. By and large, from what we can tell, a majority of Russians do support this war, but there is of course a smaller minority of them that do not support this war. As we can see that guy right there, he's clearly not a big fan of the whole thing. When you see them now picking up the only speaker, as it probably has a microchip in it that's now worth 10 million rubles in Russia, since they can't get any more of them. And it all looks like it's a lot of fun to be at this demonstration. And that's the end of this little video, but I gotta say, it's good to see that some Russians still, 6.5 months after this war started, are still taking it upon themselves to show that they are not really big fans of this war. Moving on out of Russia and into the actual areas that we've seen the Russians appear to be lashing out at, which is in the Donetsk region, which we have an incredibly large amount of news from tonight, it appears that the Russians have had to try and find a way to use Dugina's dead daughter as kind of a catalyst or a motivator to begin large offensives again that will probably be more acceptable in the public's eye in Russia. And so what we can see here in Avdiivka is that it appears that Ukrainian vehicles are being hit by artillery, although I do have to point out one thing with this. While these may be Ukrainian vehicles, I'm not entirely sure. The video quality for a Russian drone is somewhat high, and it also looks like there is a painted O on the front of this BMP, and it also looks like there's some kind of painted inscription on the rest of the vehicles. And so we're not exactly sure if these are Ukrainian vehicles. These may be Russian due to the markings on the front, because we've never seen Ukrainians do anything like this. But anyways, here's the video. You see two soldiers moving down the road with a BMP-1 sitting in between them. You now see the BMP rolling forward, and the artillery comes in about 100 yards away at the start. Another round comes in, this time missing the second vehicle in the column by about 30 yards. We can now see a third BMP coming in, stacking up in nearly what is almost a large column. The next artillery round came in right behind what appears to be a BRDM, nearly hitting it, but it appears it wasn't damaged enough as it's still moving and we don't see any black smoke of death. We can now see a main battle tank moving down the road. I'm assuming it's some kind of a T-72. Now the tank is sitting here. It's fired. Another artillery shell comes in pretty far away from the tank. Another artillery round comes in. This time we can't see the vehicles in a top-down perspective, so we don't know if one was hit there or not. We now see more rounds slamming down into the tree line, closer to where the tank was, and now we can see the black smoke of death billowing out of the tree line, which suggests that one of these vehicles were destroyed. Now, I'm going to have to pull a forensics investigation here on this one, because I'm finding it highly unlikely that the Ukrainians have painted any kind of white symbols on their tanks, as that would get them heavily confused with Russians on the by and large basis. So let's go back and look at that, because this may be a mislabeled video. Let's see here. Okay, white marking on that tank that just rolled in. The third vehicle in this group has some kind of white marking on the front of the hull. We can see white markings on the side of that BRDM. And we can also see a white marking earlier on that BMP that's hidden under that tree. And so I gotta say, while this video and its caption says that this is Russian artillery hitting Ukrainian vehicles near Avdiivka, I actually believe that these are Russian vehicles being hit by Ukrainian artillery near Avdiivka. And so we're going to shift the video over to the Russian side of the front lines, considering that it wouldn't make any sense for the Ukrainians to get their vehicles that confusing looking against the Russians. That's the whole reason why the Russians painted O's and Z's onto their tanks, is so they couldn't be mistaken by Ukrainians, and so it wouldn't make a lot of sense for the Ukrainians to make a similar marking on their vehicles. Moving on into the next bit of news near Avdiivka, we also saw that the Ukrainians had been using incendiaries against the Russians today, which we've seen them do before on a smaller scale, but now it seems that they're doing a little bit of an eye for an eye kind of thing with the incendiaries, and if the Russians are using the incendiaries on them, they're going to shoot them right back. And so here's a video from drone of Ukrainian incendiaries landing in the area of Russians, and then catching this whole entire tree, this tree line on fire like kindling. We now see the incendiaries have landed in the tree line. More incendiaries coming down. Now it looks like they're starting to burn and smolder, as we can see white smoke coming up from the tree line. Looks like it's actually starting a pretty decent fire. Unfortunately, we can't see if Russian units are flushed out of these woods by those incendiaries, but still it's interesting to see that the Ukrainians are firing incendiaries at the Russians. It's showing a little bit of a tit-for-tat kind of thing in that regard with Russians and the Ukrainians at this point with incendiaries. Moving further down the front line, I think this may be the next largest amount of news, rather than the Russians appearing to try and pick up some kind of offensive activity in the Donbass, is that the Ukrainians have done something I didn't think they would do. But now, it seems like nothing's off the table for them now that they have some pretty decently accurate Western weapons. Well, actually incredibly accurate Western weapons. We can see that Ukraine hit the DPR's administrative building within Donetsk city. This, in a way, is much like the Duma or the Rada for Ukraine or the Duma for Russia. This is where the actual decisions, quote unquote, although we know that they're made by Russia, are made in the DPR. And apparently the Ukrainians have attacked it directly. Here's the video showing the damage. Pretty nice to see. That's actually very interesting to see, because usually countries do not go after each other's, I guess you could say, administrative and capital buildings, because you usually want those people alive, so that way if you do win, you can negotiate with them. But it appears that the Ukrainians, much like they should, are not considering the DPR or the LPR legitimate states. They have never been recognized officially by anyone outside of Russia. And so they're treating them like that, and they're treating them like rebels. And so they're hitting the capital building of the DPR dead on with what we can assume is most likely a HIMARS strike. Although, that's still a little questionable because the damage here looks like it may also be caused by a 127mm. Still, the Ukrainians have hit the capital, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. We're now going to be moving on a little bit further behind the front lines to day 180, where we saw that the Ukrainians have also hit another ammunition depot way behind the lines in Donetsk and have caused a decent little fire and explosion. And, not only that, somehow it was captured on drone. So here's a video of that. You can see a little bit of smoking, a little bit of crackling and popping. Pretty decent explosion right there. And this appears, at least in scale of the explosion, to be a smaller ammunition depot. It may have been far closer to the front lines than what we marked here. We know that it was in the Donetsk Oblast, and so we put the marker where we thought it may be, but considering it's such a small scale of ammunition, nothing massive at all, I would have to assume it was probably within 10 miles of the front lines or less, because usually the closer you get to the front lines, the less the amount of ammunition that's stored into a single depot. It's kind of like I'm not going to go into the whole logistics thing. That's for another time, because that would take about an hour to explain how it works, at least historically. But with that, we're now going to be moving on to the area of Pisky, where we have seen that the Russians, once again, like I was trying to say earlier, are pushing out of the area, and it seems like, well, not really pushing out of the area, they're attempting to push out of the area. And we can see here that the 100th Brigade of the DPR is trying to push south of Pisky here in this video. This was actually geolocated, so we know that this marker is fairly accurate. But here's the video. I'm gonna have to mute it. But you can see these trench works here that are largely empty. We don't see a single soul within them. And we see a Russian flag up there in the top corner, which lets us know that there's a certain kind of spin being put on this video when it's presented. Also, I like the giant Anna down here at the bottom right. I don't know who Anna is, but we can now see a Russian tank and a BMP-2 right here. And they said action, and the homeless people come running out the woods in their old gear. They come running out in a giant group. Oh man, I don't know what's so funny about this. It's like someone in the BMP literally had a megaphone and just kind of had the rear door open a little bit and yelled action, and they started running in a giant group.
It almost looks green screened.
Kind of, but the shadows are reflecting on the ground fairly well, so I'd assume it's real. But Jesus, okay, now here's something I've always talked about, and this shows y'all how bad off the DPR, the LPR, and the Russian army is. That tank right there, watch when it actually spools up the engine a little to move. It almost looks like it's deploying a smoke screen. That lets y'all know that that thing has an old filter. This thing is so old that when Moses parted the Red Sea and crossed to Israel, he made one of these filters and sold it to the Russians back then. That thing is so freaking old. It's unbelievable to think that it's still even running. Filters like vehicles like tanks require a decent amount of expensive maintenance, and you will rarely ever see an American tank or a Western tank from any Western country for that matter emitting that kind of smoke when just conducting normal movements of traversing the tank left, right, forward, backward, or wherever you may go. It shows you that there is a small budget that the DPR, LPR, and the Russians are running off of that doesn't allow them to replace simple and cheap facets of a tank like a filter. We now see the Russian, the DPR infantry all crowding behind the BMP-2, which is not smart. We can now see more of them running out of the woods. When you see the BMP-2 firing, and the group has been told to keep moving. I don't know what their plan is right now. There's more of them. We got about 20 guys out here in the field. It looks like a school field trip gone wild. The teacher is trying to get the students back in line. They're running off. Now we can see that the tank is actually deploying a smoke screen. We can see that the machine gun on the top of the turret is being fired off. And now these Russians are moving into this trench, which has been abandoned since the start of the video. So great job for them. They're really covering ground. Now they're getting hotboxed by their own tank. They're going to be down in that trench going, take the next one. Oh, goodness. Now they can't see squat. Now the Russians that got in the trench can't see anything. If there was Ukrainians there, they wouldn't know. Oh, my Lord. This was a sad video. We didn't even see Ukrainians in the video at all. The whole entire place looks like it's been abandoned. Well, weirdly enough, the Russians literally disappeared in a puff of smoke because once the smoke dissipates, I don't see any of them anymore except for like 2 of these guys. Now that it's zoomed out, let me show y'all something that was actually really smart with the geolocation. He gave off a landmark in a way, and I'll show y'all exactly where they are, because we can see in this video. It zoomed out, and it showed us something like a destroyed interstate system, it appeared, that was somewhere in the Pisky area. And so if we go up here, you can actually see the road that they're on and where they are. You can see that the road takes a gradual turn. There's a tree line right here that creates a kind of triangular shape with the highway and the tree lines. So we go right here, you can see that triangular shape with the highway and the tree lines, which tells us that those Russians are about right here. And as we zoom in, you can actually see that whenever this was taken, there was actually a checkpoint on this interstate, and it looked like this area was manned since it had fresh sandbags. But in this video, we saw none of that. It appears the place has been abandoned for quite some while, and we can also see some pretty elaborate trench works that zigzag their way down the sides of the highway in both directions. That's the end of the video, and now that we know exactly where they are, let's take a look at this. So we can see that they're about down here. Pisky's up here, and this is where most of the fighting has been happening so far. I wish I could draw up lines on this, but let's take a look here. So this appears to be some destroyed buildings, already destroyed during the 2014 to now conflict, as well as these. And so if we get a pretty good idea, we can actually adjust our frontline map here incredibly well to account for all of this. So the front line is actually, we adjust it, it's about fling me up here, and then we move back down here. It's actually about right there. And so it looks like, at least in theory, that they could reach up towards the E50 and cut the Ukrainians off. But then again, you have to remember that everything from here to that bridge is open ground. And while there are a few tree lines there to break line of sight occasionally, the Ukrainian artillery could just hammer these guys back by tomorrow or the next day. And so while it does seem a little bit concerning that the Ukrainians could be cut off in Pisky, I don't think it will be too much of an issue for them to worry about, considering the obstacles that the Russians will have to face from then on. And also, there's some pretty defensible ground in this area, although we won't go into that all too well, at least from what I can see. Anyways, with that, now that we've seen that little video of the Russians making what appears to be a little push, and we'll move that marker up to represent exactly where it is, we're now going to be moving down to Marinka, where we can see that the Russians, like I said earlier, the Ukrainians are doing a tit for tat with the incendiaries. We can actually see that the Russians are heavily using incendiaries still, especially in Marinka, as a small video came out of incendiary rounds being fired and raining down on the town of Marinka. Here's the video. And also, let me turn this up a little bit.
Сейчас. Сука. Ёбаный Донецк.
And that's the end of that video, but you can see that the Russians are really trying to root the Ukrainians out of Marinka and push them further back down the N15, most likely towards Irivka or any other town further down that's unpronounceable, unfortunately. Moving on behind the lines, though, we can see that the Ukrainians have responded in kind during the daylight hours of today, as they rained down artillery from the 54th Brigade only. Both of these videos came from the 54th, of them inflicting considerable damage against Russian units. And so here's the video of that. Well, at least the first one. We'll get to the second one here in a minute. Wow, that's an intro. All right, so let's see. Nope, that's really copyrighted music right there. We can now see a drone looking at a house. We can see a Russian wandering around. And I've got to say, you know, when I look at this kind of stuff right here with the destroyed houses and all, I wonder if this is an upgrade for the Russians or not, because as we know, a lot of them don't even have plumbing facilities, at least from what we've heard in interrogations, the ones that come from the more provincial areas of Russia. And so I wonder, even with these houses being destroyed this bad, if the toilets are still flushing, is this an upgrade for them or not? When you see the guy wandering around, he looks like he's on a casual stroll. And any second now, the Ukrainians will interrupt that stroll, and they just did. We're now looking back at the house. The Russians, in all of their wisdom and intelligence, instead of running away from where the artillery blast came from, they're going to walk right into where the last one happened. And it looks like that was almost a smart move, but they didn't get far enough away, as the next round slammed down right where the video started. Now we see a Russian hanging out over here. The artillery barrages haven't really phased him too much, but I think that one did. Now we can see. Let me take a good look at this. We can see them carrying a guy away, but they're like pulling him in every direction as they walk. So it's almost like a medieval stretching torture device, nearly, that they're pulling on this guy. That is the most discoordinated, like, stretcher bearer team that I've ever seen. This guy's literally walking into a wall. He gets stuck and he pulls the guy's leg backwards. Let's watch that again. So they walk forward. This guy, oof, it's literally a Three Stooges routine. They're pulling the guy in every direction right there. And the backwards
They can't do anything right.
Yeah, they can't do nothing right. And now now they did such a bad job. The video quality has literally dropped by several hundred pixels. And I think that literally is just the video. It is apparently not the graphic quality dropping on my computer. We can see them carrying him on. Wait a minute, did they just drop him? Nope. Oh, well, no, that was one of the stretcher bearers. He's now... Well, it looks like he may have gotten knocked around. Now they dropped the guy that they were carrying. So, okay.
This is the clown show.
Now we know what's happened here. The explosion went off. This guy freaked out. He fell to the ground because he got up perfectly fine. And then they dropped that guy. And then they pick him up, shirt dragging across the ground. They're carrying him like some kind of lion they killed on safari. And now they're pulling him into the house. They throw his jacket in the way so they can trip over it. They're banging his head on all the steps, moving him up there. And then here comes the act. Wait a minute. After all of that crap, after everything they just did to get that guy in that house, here comes Ivan, who's had the stretcher the whole time. He could have just whipped that thing out, and they could have carried him into the house real easy, but no. These four guys had to pull a clown routine carrying this dude around, and now here comes a stretcher. It just doesn't get better than this, does it? This kind of clown buffoonery, you just can't get from anyone but the Russians. The guy's literally walking in with a stretcher. There can't be anything else. They're all just casually walking into where the last rounds fell. Oh, let's go pick him up now. Another artillery round comes in. This guy... Poof. This guy has... Wow, okay. Alright, so I just want to make sure before I said anything that I got it clear. He comes walking around the corner. The artillery shell explodes. None of the shrapnel hits him. And he gets so freaked out, he goes running and tripping backwards right here. Watch. He goes running and he trips. You know, that guy would be great in a horror movie, because if Jason Voorhees was chasing him, he'd be like every protagonist in those films. He'd just be tripping and falling as he's running away. But you now see him decide it's safe after the round just fell yards away, and he now goes walking through the smoke of where that round just exploded and towards the house where everyone is gathered at this point to go check out the guy that they literally just pulled apart as they tried to pull him into the house. Now they're all running into a large group. As we know, this is a perfect recipe for a live leak logo to pop up in the top left corner of the video. And if y'all don't know what live leak is, I'm glad y'all don't. We can see another artillery round slamming down right behind him. We don't know if the shrapnel got any of them or not, but they were incredibly close. Oh my god. All right. Let me explain what's about to happen. they got a conga line going on right here. It literally looks like a conga line from the air. So let's pull that up real quick. A conga line. Alright. Y'all remember conga lines? Like that, right there. That's a conga line. These Russians, on drone footage, as we can see, we have video evidence. The Russians are literally doing conga lines on the front. Right here, look at that. That's a conga line. And we can see the glint of a bomblet right there. Conga line plus bomblet equals losses. I hate to say it, but these Russians will not be going on too much longer with their conga line and party stuff. The bomblet's on the way. And oh my lord. It whizzes out of the way. They drop the wounded guy where he is. Everyone's running away. It looks like no one was, except for one guy may have been injured. Actually, no, he may be fine. He just got up after all that and started running off. Wounded guy left there with a drone looking straight down at him.
That is still amazing to me how the Russians will just run off and leave their wounded. That is astonishing.
It is. And look at him. He just decided, he was like, well, I know how this goes. No one's going to come back and get me. So he just literally gets up off the stretcher and starts running away. That's insanity right there. When someone on a stretcher actually knows there's no saving me. No one's going to come back and get me and carry me out of here. And so in your wounded, heavily wounded state, for all we know with this guy, he has to force himself to muster the strength to get up and try and run off because he knows that the Russian just 20 yards away is not going to come down there and try and help him out. And they're just going to leave the guy to die. It's a sad thing to see how the Russians actually operate. You can almost pity a lot of them because, you know, a lot of them are conscripts most likely and don't want to be there. Others, you know, they're committing war crimes, not at all. But still, you can almost pity them because you can see how clownish they are in everything they do, from pulling a guy in 4 different directions trying to get him into a house to dropping this guy and getting so freaked out that everyone just runs away. I mean, this is just, the whole entire thing is pitiful, honestly. And to think that these goofballs are what the Russians call their cream of the crop is incredibly sad, actually, and kind of tells me that this war, even if it goes on forever, the Ukrainians are probably not going to lose it just because that's what they're going up against. Anyways, with that, we're now going to be moving on to our second video of the 54th Brigade, also dropping more artillery fire on another Russian unit in the same area. Actually, wait a minute. I think this may have been the same video with different watermarks put on it. It was. I was confused at the start by the watermarks, but as you notice in between this video and this one, the watermarks are a little different. You can actually see the intro is entirely different. If we go here, see how, now this is weird. See how this one has the K2 watermark in the bottom right, but 2 different ones over here on the left side? This one didn't. And when I originally watched this video for a couple of seconds just to see if it was different, I saw the watermarks and assumed, oh, okay, it's a little different. But apparently someone just republished it and threw down 2 more watermarks on it. So apparently that's the only video we have of the 54th Brigade hitting the Russians. But based off of that, I bet y'all can get a pretty good idea that no matter how many times the Russians drop incendiary rounds on Marinka, I don't think they're ever going to be able to take it, especially with that quality of soldier. Anyways, with that, we have one last bit of news to cover in the Donetsk region, which is all the way down in the small village of Rostolny, where we saw another ammunition dump exploding in the night from a Ukrainian HIMARS attack. Here's the video from a distance. That's quite an explosion. You know, I wonder if Russians, well, not Russians, if DPR citizens ever wake up to these explosions, you know, like a heavy sleeper, and they go to, like, you know, go to the bathroom or something in the middle of the night, and they look out the window and are like, wow, it's dawn already? How is that so? And I wonder if anyone ever thinks that, because some of these explosions like this one are so large you would almost think that the sun is rising over Donetsk the next day. And it's honestly impressive to think that the Russians continuously store this many thousands of tons of ammunition in the same places every single time for them to continuously be destroyed at this point. It's a miracle, really, that the Russians have any supplies to work off of at the front lines at all. And so with that, now that we've covered this last ammunition dump explosion in the Donetsk region, we're now finally going to be moving on out of Donetsk and towards our location unknowns and also our Kharkiv news, which we've had a little bit of today. But before we get to both of those things, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then be moving on into the next segment. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, folks, and we are now moving into our first question segment of the night. And as you all know, we do have a poll to address. And the question was, do you think Ukraine's strategy is becoming more aggressive? A pretty simplistic poll, and it looks like 80% of you said yes, more aggressive strategy, and 20% said no, strategy remains the same. Now for me, I would have to say that I believe Ukraine's strategy is getting more aggressive simply because of what has happened in Crimea. I think that's a strong indicator that they're trying to go on the offensive. But Enforcer, what are your thoughts?
I would honestly have to say I think the Ukrainian strategy is getting far more aggressive recently, especially not really on the frontline activities. The frontline activities honestly have been remaining at a constant rate for about the past 2 months. However, their missile attacks and long-range artillery are starting to go more and more on the offensive within this past 2 weeks or so. As like Matthew said, we've seen multiple attacks reaching deep into Crimea, all the way to Sevastopol itself and hitting the Black Sea Fleet's headquarters directly. And in those regards, I would have to say the Ukrainian strategy is getting far more aggressive, which may be suggesting that a counterattack may be well underway. We've got to remember that they've now pretty much neutered the Russian army in the southern front, now that it will most likely be lacking quick air support from the Russian Air Force or any kind of naval support from the Black Sea Fleet, which, if y'all didn't know, under certain circumstances with certain kinds of weapons that some ships carry, could fire inland at infantry, although that's a very niche kind of thing, and it would only occur in several parts of the front down here because they only have so much range. But still, considering that, it does appear that their strategy is getting far more offensive than it used to be, where it was mostly defensive and they would strike ammunition depots and things behind the line that pertain to Russian offensives and trying to cripple them as best they could. And nowadays it looks like they're now trying to destroy Russian equipment far behind the lines for what may be potential offensives. But with that, I hope I have answered that poll fairly well, and we're now on to the second one that I see is still up right now.
All right, and that second poll says, as of today, how would you assess Ukraine's status in the war? And just for everybody to know, this poll has only been up for 2 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and go over the preliminary results, but we are going to leave it up for a little bit longer. It looks like 54% of you say they are in a stalemate, 39% say they are winning and taking ground, and only 6% say they are losing, meaning obviously losing ground. So I would have to tend to agree with the 54% that said they're in a stalemate. They are getting more aggressive in their strategy, as I mentioned earlier. However, I would have to settle on a stalemate, I do believe. But Enforcer, what are your thoughts?
My actual thoughts on that poll, I'd also have to agree with the 54%. It's largely a stalemate. The Ukrainians have been getting in some pretty decent blows against the Russians, like, for example, the Saki airfield, as well as Sevastopol International Airport, Dzhankoy, among many others, and also the destruction of the Antonovsky Bridge. And also, I would like to take a moment to correct something real quick, because sometimes I think that people aren't around to hear that I do correct some wrong information here and there. I've been saying for quite a while that there has been a pontoon bridge set up directly alongside the Antonovsky Bridge, and some viewers said that's not correct. Could you please go back and look at it, because it's actually a ferry made out of pontoon bridge segments. And so I did some researching off stream, and I actually did find out, while it did look like a pontoon bridge in the picture, it is actually just a couple of pontoon bridge spans that are towed across by pretty much tugs. And so that's the only kind of logistics transport they have near the Antonovsky Bridge, which makes the Russian supply condition even worse than we originally anticipated. It's also pretty good to know. But I just wanted to correct that real quick, just in case if y'all aren't around. Hours into the stream, probably 2 hours from now, when I actually would get around to correcting something like that, because I do listen to y'all, and if there is any information that y'all say, can you please review that? I'm not really sure if that's correct. I will go back and take a look at it and see about adjusting it, and I just want to let y'all know. But anyways, getting back to the poll, I do think it's largely a stalemate. although I do see the potential where they can start to win and take ground back. The Kherson area right now appears to be the most advantageous of these opportunities, as considering now that we know that the Antonovsky Bridge has been replaced by a ferry, which probably only runs at certain times of the day, depending on, the currents of the river and such things like that, as well as the Antonovsky Railroad Bridge being knocked out, and also an indiscernible amount of damage being committed against the Novokakhovka Bridge. We knew it was mildly damaged for quite a while, and we have seen video evidence that it's still usable, but after that last HIMARS strike that occurred on Sunday, I'm not exactly sure if it is still operational or not, and we're still waiting for any kind of video or picture evidence showing the level and the extent of damage that's been caused by the last HIMARS attack. So with that in mind, I do think that there is the possibility that the Ukrainians could start winning and taking massive swaths of ground, like everything on the western bank. But at the same time, right now, it does appear that they've been in a stalemate for quite some while. But still, that's really good for a country that's on the defensive against the country that planned to take over the entirety of Ukraine. If the Ukrainians are holding them, no matter how long that goes on, they're actually winning. In a defensive war, you don't have to be covering ground. That's if you're on the offensive like the Russians. To be considering this war a winning war in Russia's eyes, they have to constantly be taking more ground, more villages, and eventually taking over the country. For the Ukrainians in a defensive war, all they have to do is make sure they don't lose any more ground than they already have, and way in the future, they can eventually start trying to push the Russians back. That's really how a defensive war works when you're a country like Ukraine that is fighting the defense. So in that, I hope that answers that poll fairly well. And with that, we're now going to move into the questions. So with that, what's our first question of the night?
All right, and moving on to our super chat questions. Up first, we have a $50 donation from Telmed, one of our longtime channel viewers and regulars, who says, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I am skeptical of Darya Dugina's assassination. They showed she died in a car explosion. Her funeral was an open casket, and her face looked pristine. Not what you'd expect from an explosion, and what are your thoughts?
Well, thank you so much for the huge support, and I also actually covered that way early on in the stream when we were talking about Darya Dugina, and you brought up some pretty good points, but I have seen some people in the live chat saying that she was jettisoned from the car, which I find kind of unbelievable. How in the world does a car bomb explode in what I'm assuming is most likely the engine bay or below you, and you eject out of the car intact without any kind of damage to your head that would cause you to not be able to have an open casket? That is one thing that I'm kind of considering at this point. Maybe the Russians have construed the story a little bit so that way they could have an open casket. But then again, if you look through Russia's history, they were a little morbid with the whole open casket thing. They had an open casket for Lenin, for Stalin. I think they had one for every single Soviet premier except for, I believe, Gorbachev. And Khrushchev, who did not die in office. But still, they do have kind of weird thing with that. So even if she was considerably damaged, at least on her face, I'm pretty sure the Russians, with their unbelievably vast embalming and, well, really just embalming skills, I'm sure they can make her look presentable for a funeral, so that way they could try and rally the Russian public around this loss and make it very visceral and graphic for them. So I'm not entirely sure now that people are saying that she's been jettisoned out of the car, and some people are now saying it's a stunt double and she's still alive. We're not getting that far into conspiracy theories because I don't really know a lot. We just know that officially she's dead. If we get any information in the future to contradict that, we will, but we did see the car explode. She was inside, as far as we knew, and so as far as we're concerned, she was killed in a car bombing. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And thank you so much once again for the support. It helps out our channel a lot. And thank you so much for just being around and being such a wonderful supporter and always supporting this channel and helping us to keep it going. And with that, we are on to the next one. Wait a minute, Gorbachev is dead.
Enforcer,
Hang on.
Yeah, I was about to mention that. I think he's actually still alive.
Wow, he should be dead, though. He's 91 years old. Jeez, he is old. I actually didn't think he was still alive. If y'all remember, after the fall of the Soviet Union, he actually showed up in a Pizza Hut ad. Like, I don't know if you knew that, Matthew, but he was actually in a
I
pizza.
did not.
Yeah, I'll pull it up real quick. At least an image of
That's
it.
an interesting character to put on a pizza commercial, to say the least.
Yep, there's the man
wow.
himself. A Russian Pizza Hut commercial. Like, this kind of stuff is honestly insane. Like, to think that he went from being the premier of the Soviet Union, probably honestly, for the Soviet Union, he was probably the worst because he literally led to the end of the thing by not keeping on the oppressive regime that everyone else had. But to think he went from the premier of the Soviet Union to popping up in a Pizza Hut ad for Russia is just a real bad step in the wrong direction. But hey, at least he wasn't Steven Seagal. I mean, like, you can give him that. Anyways, moving on from that, I'm glad that everyone corrected me there. For some reason, I thought he was dead. I think that's kind of like a Mandela effect thing, because I could almost swear that I heard he died a few years ago. Anyways, with that, we're now moving on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
All right, and up next, we have a $50 super chat from Gary Robbins, who is also a longtime channel viewer, supporter, and legend. He says, good to see you back. Did you have a good Monday off?
Hey, well, thank you so much for the support, Gary. And yes, I actually did have a pretty good Monday off. Matthew and me just started college classes this week. And so we've kind of been wandering around college. This is really the first semester rather than one about a year ago in the summer that I've gone in person. And I actually had a really fun time today. I don't know if the people I met are watching. I actually plugged my channel, which is kind of odd because, you know, they know what I look like. But anyways, plugged my channel. I don't know if they're watching, but it would be cool to know if they were or weren't. So if any of y'all are watching, hey, how are you doing? It was a huge class. It was the first time I ever gone into a college class that was in a lecture hall. It was like 100 people or so. But it was really cool. So I had like a pretty good day today. That actually happened today. And Matthew had a pretty fun one yesterday, although he dropped all of his classes yesterday to pick up some online ones, so that way we didn't have to make the massive drive to our college, because it's like a 40-minute drive. Anyways, with that, I hope that kind of answers the question. And also, to speak more about what I actually did on Monday, it was a fun day. I didn't really do a lot. I actually tried to download a new game I got because some friends want me to get it, and although I don't have enough free time to probably ever play it, it's called Star Citizen. I don't know if any of y'all play it. I haven't even really played it at all yet. I've played like 40 minutes of it. But if y'all think that's fun, let me know, and let me know if any of y'all play Star Citizen, because that would just be neat to know. Anyways, with that, thank you so much once again for the support, Gary. It helps us out a lot, and thank you so much for caring about us and just being such a kind person overall. I'm always at a loss for words while I sit here and stutter through this as to how to thank y'all for y'all's kindness, but I do thank you so much again for being incredibly nice and supporting this channel so much. And with that, we are on to the final question of this segment, and then we'll be moving on into the next bit of news.
And I'll have to say real quick, to add to the enforcer's point, I also plugged the channel everywhere I could when I started back to classes. And yes, like the enforcer mentioned, that is a very long drive from our house to that university. So I had to restructure things a little bit so I still have time and I'm not exhausted when I come on these streams. So yes, it's good to be back in class again. But anyways, moving on to our last super chat of the segment, we have a $30 donation from White Lightning 777, who says, was Natalia Vovk married to or romantically involved with a soldier in the Azov battalion? She might have placed that car bomb taking the life of Darya Dugina. Azov vowed to kill Putin and his henchmen due to POW mistreatment.
So, this woman here is the woman who's claimed, at least according to this news article on the Daily Mail, and I don't know how trustworthy the Daily Mail is, she's the one who's claimed to have killed Darya Dugina. Is the name, let's see, FSB. She's a veteran of Mariupol's Azov battalion turned spy. If they knew all that information, then how'd she get so far being a spy who spent weeks tracking Darya Dugina before planting 800 grams of explosives under the driver's seat of her car on the 20th and rigging it to blow as she left a festival near Moscow? But Kyiv denied any link. We can see a picture of her here, Natalia Vovk, born in the city of Mariupol in 1976. It appears there's at least some truth to that information. Her account was last active in 2016, and she had a few dozen followers. So it seems like they picked a very obscure person, but then again, someone like her in her supposed role would probably have a very obscure profile on the internet. You wouldn't want to be someone like me with 93,000 subscribers wandering around Russia as a spy, because then you might get found out a little bit quicker. But let's see here. We can see Russia claims, interestingly enough, her military ID. Now, my question is, how do they have her military ID without ever finding her? Like, where in the world did they find this? You know, like, it does look pretty legitimate, though. It is a picture of someone who looks a lot like her. It may be her in a military uniform. And so this may actually be her military ID, but how in the world did they get a hold of that? FSB, oh, okay, look at this. This is funny. FSB says Natalia crossed its border from Ukraine on July 23rd, driving a Mini Cooper with number plates issued by the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, the occupied region of Ukraine which now controls Mariupol. Now, are y'all seeing a couple of problems here? The FSB saw her cross the border on the 23rd with a Mini Cooper. Does anyone not realize that there's a war going on right now? Like, how in the world do you just drive past the Russian army that is all across the border of Ukraine in a Mini Cooper, them knowing you're apparently some kind of spy or a member of the Azov battalion, and then drive uninterrupted all the way to Moscow to then plant a bomb under someone's car? That seems a little bit suspicious, considering that they've got such a well-constructed story of how she got there, how she did this. And once again, this is coming from the Daily Mail, so we don't know if all of this is true, but still, very interesting. Spies have been published what? Spies have published CCTV footage that they say shows her at the border crossing point as guards inspect the vehicle. And so while there's a war going on, and people are getting plastered left and right by the Russians and the Ukrainians, she drives up to the border. I'm guessing it's Sumy, like right here. She drives up to here, and they tell her, pull over, or we're looking through your car. And then she just gets through. And the FSB knew this much about her. This is all starting to sound a little far-fetched. I don't know about y'all, but this is getting a little questionable to me. Natalia is accused of spending weeks tracking Dugina before planting a bomb under her car as she attended a traditional poetry festival at the Zakharovo estate near Moscow on Saturday with Father Alexander. So let's pull up the Zakharovo. Zakharovo. Is there a name like that? Zakharovo estate. Let's just copy that and paste it. Zakharovo estate. Let's see if it pulls up the one in Moskva. That is in Moscow. Okay. So, the Zakharovo estate. I'm assuming it's this one here. Let's take a look. This is the Zakharovo estate, so this is supposedly where she was before she drove off. That looks like a copy of Mount Vernon. Doesn't it? I mean, like, it...
Well, that's actually really close. I'll admit.
It's actually kind of close. That's kind of weird. When was this building made? We'll have to get back to that in a little bit. But this looks like another building on the property. This one looking a little bit better than the last. And interestingly enough, it just kind of looks like a park for the Russians to hang out at. So apparently she was at a poetry festival here. She left, and then the bomb exploded and killed her. Now, one thing that's interesting to me, though, is what is this place out here? I want to see if there's a street view. There is. Let's take a look at this. Oh, I see. The road's nicely paved. This is actually something rare for rural Russia. And honestly, looking at these houses, this looks kind of like a nicer area of Russia once you get outside of Moscow. Moscow and St. Petersburg are incredibly nice for the most part in the center of the city, but once you get to the outskirts, it's terrible, and usually when you're outside of those two cities, everything looks like dog, but apparently this area looks pretty decent, which is kind of interesting. Also, they have a parking lot here. That's really rare in any European country. Anyways, moving on from that, that's where she was. She got blown up from there, and so that's actually a lot further out of Moscow than I supposed. I assumed it was somewhere more towards the center of Moscow, because the place it looked like she was killed at looked like it was somewhere out here, like in the areas of like Ovchevkovo or Kuntsevo, like somewhere around there. That's what I was thinking, but apparently not. Russian intelligence says Natalia used this specific Mini, and that apparently is her as a driver. Who's in the passenger seat? I don't, like, she didn't come over with anyone else, according to the story so far. And if we look at this picture of her, she's got, Like brunette hair, and if we go down here, it's like her hair is up in a bun. But then again, she could have changed her appearance, I don't know. But then again, considering she was literally obscure until now, maybe not. They also claim to have uncovered an advert on Ukrainian social media trying to sell the Mini Cooper she was driving. Yeah, I don't know about this stuff. To answer that question the best I can, White Lightning 777, this story seems a little odd. And I can't really confirm nor deny that it was actually this particular woman in question, because, I mean, it's really questionable. The story is just far too well constructed at this point. It's almost like the FSB would have known what she was doing if they knew this much information about her beforehand and where she was. And the ultimate thing that throws a shadow of doubt into this is how in the world, in the middle of this war, does she drive to the Ukrainian border, somehow get checked by border guards, and then drive across? You would think, considering it's wartime, they wouldn't be allowing people to cross the border into Russia. But apparently, that's the story they're trying to sell. So, with that, to try and circle back and answer that question the best I can, I'm not entirely sure about it. There's a lot of questions I have. So with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're now moving on into the next segment of news, starting off with our location unknowns. And we're actually going to be starting off on day 180 and moving our day into 181. So starting off with our first clip, we can see some Russian vehicles getting hit. We can see that they parked one. Actually, both of them appear to be Tiger armored cars. We hear some music playing. When you see them walking around the back, it looks like they're unloading for a barbecue. But what they don't know is that they're about to be the roast. The first Tiger in the convoy is hit dead on by an artillery shell. The crew from the rear Tiger appear to be running off into the tree line and away from where the artillery shell landed. And as we zoom in, we can see the black smoke of death. Actually, it's a grayish smoke billowing out of the back of that Tiger, but we can see that it looks to have taken a dead-on hit and was most likely destroyed. And so with that, that's the end of that video. A pretty good way to start off our location unknowns. Moving on into the next one, we can see some more artillery casualties. We see the Russians moving around. We can see a Z clearly on the side of one of those vehicles. Also, a whole bunch of civilian vehicles here. We now see the Russians standing around and enjoying a smoke break. We can see a white Lada driving in. That thing probably cost about a song and a hamburger. Although Russians don't eat hamburgers, they eat meat with bread. A North Korean invention. The artillery is now landing all around them, and it looks like it's fairly accurate, actually. It looks like that fell right where that KAMAZ or small supply truck was. Artillery is raining down pretty thick on the place, and it looks like they might be trying to hit just everything. Of course, they had to hone in the first two shots. They were kind of a little off, but now it looks like they're aiming straight for the cluster of vehicles and troops that's most likely within those compound of houses. The artillery is still coming down. It's actually coming down kind of nicely. It's like a nice trickle. We see black smoke billowing out of the tree line. Actually, a really thick column of it, so maybe a couple of vehicles destroyed. We just heard Matthew slam down a clipboard on his desk. The artillery is still...
That was actually my old Weeble Wobble chair.
And now we're getting some close-up footage of what was an attempted turret toss, but didn't really turn into one. We now see explosions still coming out of one of the houses, which shows it was being used as a small-time ammo dump. And that's the end of the video. Pretty impressive all around. It's nice to see the Ukrainians are putting a nice wide little spread on the Russians in that area, inflicting some pretty good casualties. Moving on into the next bit of location unknown news, we can see that an anti-drone gun worked. We've been wondering about the anti-drone guns for months now, wondering if they actually work, and we finally got some video evidence of a unit claiming that they took down an Orlan 10 using that halo-looking gun thing. I don't even know what it's actually called. They say it's a Veritas, but I'm sure that someone's about to say it's K Veritas or something like that. So it's an anti-drone gun, but they were able to take down the Orlan 10.
Мы, Легион Свободы России, выполняя свои задачи, приземлили очередной хваленый Орла.
I like how they're standing around it like it's some kind of game bird that they shot down. You know, they're like, we shot down the game bird on vacation.
Вначале мы освободим братскую Украину от рашистской нечисти, а потом свою родину от путинского режима. До встречи.
And that's the end of the video. And it looks like this is actually the Freedom of Russia Legion, most likely, as we can see right here. And also, it looks like they've now adopted the PewDiePie Bro Fist as their logo. That's kind of interesting. But anyways, with that, we're now going to be moving on into the next bit of location unknown news. And it's actually really good to see that that anti-drone gun actually works, because for the longest time, it was very questionable whether it did or didn't. Moving on to our last clip from day 180, before we move on to day 181, y'all may remember that the entire nation of Lithuania banded together on a massive fundraiser, and a massive undertaking that we have not even been able to compare to this day, and we're able to raise $3.5 million for a Bayraktar drone. The Lithuanians then bought it and sent it to Ukraine. We finally got footage today, well actually yesterday, the first footage of the Lithuanian Bayraktar in use and destroying Russians on the ground, which also confirms that the Bayraktars are actually used in normal frontline operations and may just be kept a good secret these days with their video footage to the world. And so we really don't have a good idea of how many Bayraktars are in the air being used and how effective they still are, but we can see here that the Lithuanian one appears to be targeting some Russian towed artillery units. Ooh. Jeez. I don't know if it was the thermal camera doing that or what, but that looked like a small nuke going off. We can see that it was pretty effective. It appears to have taken out the entire crew of the first gun, and it looks like it wounded people on the second gun and also led them into a route pretty much from where they were. With that, that's the end of the video, and it's good to see that the Lithuanian Bayraktar is able to knock out 2 artillery pieces on film. While it may have not damaged the artillery pieces directly, it did take out the crews, and without the crew, the piece can't fire. And so great to see that they were able to knock those out. And so we're going to be moving on into day 181, which we actually have one less bit of news than day 180. Anyways, moving on to here. Our first clip is showing a Ukrainian drone dropping a bomblet straight through the hatch of a Russian BMD. It looks like a BMD-2, so here's the video. The bomblet's on its way, and it goes right through the hatch, right into the BMD. Now we can see that it looks like they're lining up another one, but sadly, the video ended right there. Also, oddly enough, look at that on the front. I don't know what that is, like a heart or something, but kind of interesting. Anyways, that's the end of the video, and it's still great to see that the Ukrainians are getting those hole-in-one kind of shots with the bomblets. Moving on into the next bit of location unknown news, we can see 2 Ukrainian peons firing at the Russians. And it's in slow motion. Now that was pretty cool. If we go back to the specific frame, you can actually see the shell, the 207mm shell, I believe, leaving the barrel and traveling downrange. Also, you can see the second one as well, but not as good. Well, actually, you can see it right there. And it's really cool to see that, and also know how large these shells really are. Now, I actually had a viewer of ours, good friend of mine as well, not going to give his name specifically, but I have shouted him out on stream before. He gave me a plastic replica of a 155mm shell, and that thing is pretty big. I mean, like, when you actually hold it, it's about the size of my torso. And well, not really the size of my torso. It's about half the size of my torso, honestly, because I'm like 6'2". Anyways, getting past that, a 203 millimeter shell versus a 155, or even a 207 millimeter shell. 155 millimeter versus 207. I wonder if there's even a picture of these things compared against each other in size. Let's see here. I think we actually saw one just a second ago. I'm gonna have to back out and click on this one. So let's see here. Oh, that's on Quora. No, thank you. Sadly, I can't get y'all a direct size comparison in between the two. But it's still pretty interesting to see how big those shells really are, and that they're so large you can actually see them on film in certain frames. With that, we're now going to be moving into our final bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a Stugna attack. Y'all love them. The Ukrainians are always giving them, and so let's see the invader tank getting a warm reception. And it was a warm one indeed. It was fiery hot. We see the tank getting hit by the Stugna. Then continues to roll forward. And then gets stuck in the ditch. And I just realized it. The Stugna videos are very similar to each other. And so while I try and get new ones, this appears that this is the third time this exact Stugna video has shown up on screen. And it's because it keeps on getting reposted. And so, sadly, this did not happen today. This happened about a week or a week and a half ago at this point. And so we're now going to be moving on. We actually, the last piece of news we covered was the last bit of Location Unknown news we had. And we've now had another repeat. I'm going to delete that, so if y'all click on the map in the description, y'all don't see that thing. So, with that in mind, we're now moving out of the Location Unknowns, and we're now going to be moving to Kharkiv, where we can see that Russia's wrath is starting to get reinvigorated again, at least in the Kharkiv area, as we can see these weird bombs exploding in air over the Kharkiv area. Here's the video. That's kind of a widescreen video. You know something? Yikes, that was loud.
That woke me up.
I didn't expect that. Let's go back and look at this thing from the very start. So we can see a bright white flash. It looks like it exploded in air over the city. We now see one that's exploding like a Morse code. My ears just got blown out.
And then pure destruction.
And when you see it falling to the ground and then exploding again. Kind of odd. I don't actually know what that would have been. Some people are saying that that's actually an intercept. But are we sure about that? Because we didn't see any kind of a missile, like a surface-to-air missile battery firing back to hit this thing. See, we just see an explosion mid-air. So I'm not really sure if it was that or not, but that was pretty interesting, and also, that was incredibly loud. I'm sorry to all of y'all who had y'all's headphones on and listened to that. I also had my headphones on, and my ears are also bleeding. And so with that, that's the end of this video, and we're now going to be moving to the front lines and also back in time to day 180, where we can see that the Ukrainians were able to destroy a Shilka. Shilka is a funny word, and the vehicle itself is kind of funny looking too. In case of y'all have never seen it, ZSU 23-4 is called a Shilka, and the Shilka has 4 guns. They're automatic, like, autocannons pretty much. And these things are used pretty much everywhere. They were used a lot in Syria against infantry. They're still used there to this day in that role. But they're odd, but they work fairly well. I'm not saying that just because they look odd, they don't work well in close range against a helicopter or an aircraft. These things are somewhat effective. But we can see that the Ukrainians are going to make sure it never is effective because they're going to destroy it. We see the Shilka sitting right there. It's just chilling. We now see them show a picture of it from Wikipedia. See, I'm not the only person who uses Wikipedia as a source. The artillery now slams down near that Shilka. And considering the thing has paper-thin armor, it was most likely, like that one, we could see a flash of light coming from the Shilka. Most likely enough firepower to destroy it. We now see the black smoke of death coming from it, letting us know it was destroyed. And with that, that's the end of that video, and pretty nice to see that the Ukrainians are still knocking out Russians in the area. Also, I heard, which can't be the case, that my audio was a little quiet, but I still have my audio settings exactly the way they are every single night, and so hopefully the audio quality is okay. Hopefully it's not too quiet. If it is, I will try and change that. So with that, we're now going to be moving on out of the Kharkiv area and our location unknowns, and down to the Izium area. Starting off on day 180, we saw that Ukrainian artillery was hitting Russian troops in the area, and it appeared to be doing a pretty decent job. When you see the Russians once again pulling off a nice conga line. Also,
Ой, красава!
looks like their conga line was interrupted by a quick artillery shot, and it looks like there's only one guy left standing.
Молодец. Оце русські ножки!
With that, that's the end of the video, and that was a pretty effective shot. It looks like it wounded or took out everyone in that unit, except for one guy. An entire squad wiped out with one explosion. With that, we're now going to be moving on out of this bit of news, and it's great to see that the Ukrainians are still knocking out Russians at a cost-efficient rate in the Izium area, and we're now going to be moving down towards Krasnopilia, where we can see a Russian tank being destroyed along with the infantry that we just saw a second ago. Here's the video. We can see that someone overdid it with the emojis, and that tank just went up in flames. Not really flames, more so in dust. It looks like a small volcano has exploded there on the road, but from what we can tell, that Russian tank ran over a mine and then evaporated. And so with that, that's the end of that video, and the end of that tank as even a material structure. I believe it's now been evaporated into molecules at this point, and so I don't think that tank is even a question of is it running or not? Is the black smoke of death showing it's dead or not? That kind of explosion right there, it definitely took out the tank. Moving on from the Liman area, well, not the Liman area, the Izium area and the Borochne area, we're now going to be moving down into Slovyansk, the Seversk area, Bakhmut, and also the rest of the southern front. But before we get to all of that news, we're going to take a quick pause to answer another 3 questions from the chat, and after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then be doing our final stretch of news for the night and rounding out our news with a speech from President Zelensky. And so with that, what do we got with the polls starting off before we get to the questions?
All right, and first up to address the prior poll that I ran, the question was, do you think the funeral arrangements for Dugin's daughter raises suspicions? 58% of you said yes, it is questionable, and 22% said I am not sure and still deciding, and 20% said nothing to it, just merely a conspiracy theory. Now for me, I would have to say it is questionable. I won't get into too many of the details because we can't confirm them all, but it does seem that if somebody's involved in a car bomb explosion, that you would not have an open casket funeral. That just seems completely wrong to me. But Enforcer, what are your thoughts once again on that one?
I would have to say it's really weird, and especially considering that the FSB in their story, according to the Daily Mail, is that the bomb was placed directly under her car seat and exploded. It was nearly a kilogram of explosive filler, pretty much, that exploded right under her. And considering that that much in explosives, a kilogram is not a small amount. That's actually a considerable size. It exploded, according to the story, directly under her, and they were still able to have an open casket. That seems highly unlikely. If that kind of explosive power blew up directly under someone, they would be turned into hamburger meat. And so I don't know how in the world they're having an open casket with her, because it just seems unlikely, especially with those kinds of explosives involved. And just in case, if we can get a concept of that. Now, I know tannerite is not a direct comparison, but let's go with 1 kilogram tannerite. Let's see here. 1.5 pounds. I think that's close to a kilogram. 1 kilogram in pounds. 1 kilogram is around 2.2 pounds of explosives, actually. And so 1.5 pounds is kind of close. Now, I'm not saying that the explosives that were used in this attack were tannerite. Obviously not. It was probably some other form of a plastic explosive. But still, the point stands that I'm just trying to show y'all what kind of a mass of explosives will cause what kind of damage. Now look at this. This is supposedly 1.5 pounds of tannerite being hit with a rifle and exploding. Oh, didn't blow up that time. And tannerite's one of the weaker explosives, actually. And look at the size of that, and tell me that if someone was sitting right on top of that tannerite when it exploded, would they look like an open casket funeral, or would they not? I would have to say no. And considering that plastic explosives are far more powerful in their explosive yield than a tannerite, I would have to say that it's not possible. It just seems highly unlikely, unless if the only thing that survived intact was her head. And so with that, sorry for getting a little bit graphic there answering that poll, but it does raise a lot of questions whether that is questionable or not, and to me, I think it is. And so with that, we're... also, someone, Melted Cheetah said her body was ejected from a confined space, the car. No way she's intact. And that's another thing. If the explosive was directly under her seat, wouldn't the explosion propel her upwards into the roof of the car instead of out of the car? That seems really questionable too, because if something explodes directly under you, the force would propel you upwards, wouldn't it? It wouldn't propel you to the sides, like forwards or to the left, the right, or the rear. And even so, you would be flying through most likely a windshield or a window. And wouldn't that leave some kind of abrasions on the face that would be maybe a little bit too gruesome for an open casket? You know, there's a lot of questions like that. And so with that, I hope that addresses the poll. And we're now on to the next one.
And just real quick, I saw many viewers say that her dad was smiling at her funeral. I don't know if that's true or not. Has the funeral already been held?
It has actually. I was thinking about including that little clip today, but honestly, it was so lame, and I was like, why cover it? And so I made sure not to include the only clip I could find today. But he was in the clip I saw. Dugin was actually sitting there talking about her first words as a baby were "Our Russia, our empire," which was really hilarious. To think that would have actually been her first words, if that's true. So I hope that kind of answers that a little bit, although it's not really a clear one. And so with that, let's address the
poll. And we're moving
polls.
on to the next one. All right. So the next poll says, when and if Ukraine gets F-16s from the U.S., will the Ukrainians establish air superiority? It looks like 49% of you said yes, it certainly would. 45% said maybe, depending on factors, and 6% said no, it would not. Now, on this one, I'll have to admit, I don't know enough about the F-16s and how it would impact the battlefield over there to know if it would allow them to establish air superiority, so I'll just have to fall within the maybe camp. But Enforcer, I'm sure, can give us some more insight on that.
I would actually have to say, considering that the Ukrainians have gotten the AGM-88 harms, if they wanted to do any kind of deep penetration operations with the F-16s, it would most likely be possible because you do have the anti-radiation elements that could be used to take out radar installations and sand batteries that would target these F-16s and shoot them down. And so in that regard, I would say it would certainly give the Ukrainians air supremacy, although that's a definite statement and there are a lot of variables at play. And I hate to always give a cop-out and always say that there's some gray area, because I feel like I say that often. But there is, and I don't ever want to sound like it's a definite thing, it's this way, and that's the only way it can be, because there's a lot at play. And anyone who says that they know it all to the point that they can give you a clear answer on everything, I find that highly questionable. And so on this one, I feel like it would give them air supremacy, but at the same time, there may be some things that I don't know about or I'm not considering right now that may lead it to be questionable. And so with that, I hope that answers the poll in the way, and we're now on into the questions. And so, what is the first question of this segment?
All right, so the first of the 3 super chats of this segment, the first one goes to Peteruser, I believe is how it's pronounced. Probably not, but that's my best attempt at it. He puts in a $50 donation and says, some gas money for your college commute. In-person classes are important, and keep up the good work. You are the kind of student I'd be glad to have in my classes.
Hey, well, thank you so much for the support, and it's cool to hear that we have college professors in my chat. That's really neat. Analytically, there would be a lot of people who are much older than me. Usually, it seems like our youngest viewers statistically are somewhere around the age of 45, which is incredibly old compared to me. I'm only 20, just in case you all didn't know. But that's really interesting to hear, and I thank you for the kind words as well. And also thank you so much for helping me to commute to college, because it's actually quite a drive, surprisingly enough. We thought that we lived close to the college. We've never really gone in person to know. But once you start trying to drive there, it's like, God, this is like this is a long ways away. And so thank you so much for the support. That will help me on my daily commute to college. And I actually only have to go Tuesdays and Thursdays, but on Thursdays I have to go once, and on Tuesdays I have to drive 2 round trips to the university and back because the classes are so far spread apart. I have to just go twice pretty much in a single day. But thank you so much once again, because it helps us out a lot. And thank you for the kind words, because I try and be as nice as possible to everyone I ever run into. I never try and have a bad bone or a bone to pick with anyone for no reason. And I hope that a lot of people think that, because I don't ever try and cause any offense where none's intended. So with that, thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope that addresses the comment fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, folks, and I'm happy to announce it looks like Sweaty Chungus is still alive. He said, thanks for the send-off the other night, and he got antibiotics and steroids. So, Chungus, I am glad to hear that you're doing much better. Luckily, it hasn't gotten to you that bad. And you've also got some steroids, which is always helpful.
Yeah, he got some steroids, and so Sweaty Chungus is about to turn into that guy. You know the one I'm talking about, Matthew? It's the Scandinavian guy who's always talking about the workout routines.
Yes, I believe so.
First, we got to talk about steroids. You know, he's like that guy. He's like, I do roid. He just openly admits he takes steroids, which, you know, most people don't do. I respect him for that, though. I think that's great to actually be honest with people when you're doing stuff like that. But still, thank you so much for the support, Sweaty. Well, not. Wait a minute. Was that his comment or something?
That was actually just a comment. But also, Sweaty Chungus is going to turn into Giga Chungus after he takes the steroids. But anyways, after that very corny joke, we are moving on to our next super chat, which is from Duncan VR, who puts in a $22 donation. And Duncan is going to put me through the ringer once again. Here he goes with the sheep noises. Duncan says, the single beep at the intro decoded as ba. The Russian military talking with Putin. Ba, moo, oink, oink, snort, roar, meow, yeah, bok, 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 ba. Enforcer, what animal sounds belong to the Russian military ranks?
The chicken. The chicken belongs to the Russian military ranks along with the pigs. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well, Duncan. And thank you once again for putting Matthew through dreadful torture. Over the weeks, it went from being a funny joke to now he dreads it. He fears it. He actually hides. I see him over there. Like, I have x-ray vision, you know, because for the purpose of this joke, I gotta have it. I can actually see in his office, he's hiding behind a curtain right now. He's scared. But I do thank you so much for scaring him once again. I find it to be quite enjoyable. And thank you so much once again for the support. And I hope that answers the question fairly well. And so with that, we're now on to the final question of the segment before we move through our last segment of news for the night.
All right. And after I get out from behind my curtain, we are moving on to the last one. The last one goes to Mark Jensen, who puts in a $20 donation and says, do you think Rasputin's daughter was not the target? Partisans, maybe.
Well, according to the story that's come out now, apparently she was the target. Or I've heard another story that that Dugin, Alexander Dugin, switched spots with his daughter with the car and just said, hey, you take that one. And then she got in it and she got blown up and killed. So I'm not really sure if he was the main target. His daughter and him are kind of into the same business of spin stories and such things like that. And if we look at Alexander Dugin showing up a lot, this guy does look like a modern Rasputin, you know. Anyways, let's go down here. Let's try and get early life ideology. Wow. Dugin disapproves of liberalism in the West, particularly U.S. hegemony. He asserts, we are on the side of Stalin and the Soviet Union. He describes himself as being a conservative. Now, that is the two most contradicting things you could ever do, is be a conservative, but also say you're on the side of the Soviet Union and Stalin, which were both communist, and that's considered far left. He's literally an antithesis of himself within an antithesis of himself. That's like saying, I don't even know what that's like saying. That's like saying, well, I'm trying to think of an appropriate kind of like comparison to that. That would be like, I can't even come up with anything that's that absurd. Like, that's insane, honestly. I can't even really describe that. We, according to him, we conservatives want a strong, solid state want order and healthy family, positive values, and reinforcing the importance of religion and the church in society. He adds, we want patriotic radio, TV, patriotic experts, patriotic clubs. We want the media that expresses national interests. According to political scientist Marlene Laurel, the thinking of Dugin, main manufacturer of a fascism a la Russe, could be described as a series of concentric circles with far-right ideologies underpinned by different political and philosophical traditions at its backbone. Let's see. I'm trying to read up on...
Enforcer, I'll just add real quick to directly answer Mark's question. In my opinion, I don't think that his daughter was the target personally. I think that if they could get the man himself, they would probably go for him, because why use his daughter to send a message to him when they could just get him himself? And also, I wanted to ask the Enforcer, have they corroborated the stories that he switched cars at the last minute?
They really haven't corroborated the story of anything for that matter, and what the FSB is even supposedly saying seems very sketchy, considering that they're saying that an explosion jettisoned her out of the car, but she was still in good enough condition to have an open casket. There's a lot of questionability to the story where you could really say anything happened and make a lot of assumptions because nothing's really adding up right now. So just seeing that, well, apparently Matthew doesn't have any comments to add to that, so we're going to be moving on here and reading about a little bit more of this. Interesting. Okay, so here is the interesting bit that sounds a lot like what Russia's trying to do right now. Dugin has theorized the foundation of a Euro-Asian empire capable of fighting the US-led Western world. In this regard, he was the organizer and first leader of the ultra-nationalist Bolshevik Party from 1993 to 98, and subsequently the National Bolshevik Front and of the Eurasia Party, and then became a non-governmental association. Dugin's Eurasiatic, we'll call it that, ideology therefore aims at the unification of all Russian-speaking peoples in a single country. His views have been characterized as fascist by some critics, and considering that literally is almost ripped out of the pages of Mein Kampf, I'd have to say it kind of is. Let's see. Let's keep on reading. I'm trying to find some more stuff. Let's see here. And we're going to skip past the rest of this because this is a lot of reading, and that's something that streams aren't really made for. But still, this guy is pretty jacked up in a way. And you know, with these views, because one thing I do have to say is that the Russians trying to create their own sphere of influence is pretty much what every country does at a point. The Chinese are creating their own sphere of influence as we speak. The United States has its own. It comprises of North America, Europe, and some other Far East Asian countries like Asia. Well, not Asia. Oh my God. Here we go. I know that's about to happen in live chat. Japan, South Korea, the Philippines in a way, Australia, New Zealand, and other countries like that. So we do have our own sphere of influence, but the Russians, with this kind of idea, especially with this guy kind of like propagating it and seeing that he's already trying to align them to the Soviet Union and Stalin specifically, even with Stalin being taught about in Russian schools as a tyrant and a mass murderer, it's a little nuts. And so you can kind of get an idea of where this guy is and where he's coming from, and it also gives you a good idea of where his daughter is coming from as well. And so with that, I hope that kind of addresses that fairly well about maybe he was the main target, considering he's the main spin doctor of this, but then again his daughter does the same thing, so I don't really know. But with that, I hope I was able to answer that question fairly well. And was that the last question of that segment?
And yes, that is actually the last one.
All right, and so with that, now that we've covered those 3 questions, we're now going to be moving on into our final news segment of the night, starting off near the Lehman area. And first, we can see that a firefight occurred in between Ukrainian soldiers and Russians somewhere in the Slovyansk region. And it's quite a firefight. You hear bullets bouncing off the ground all around them, and they are laying down the fire. This is... I can't even really commentate on this much because I'm just trying to watch and see what's going on. It is an insane firefight right now in between the two sides, and it sounds like they're rather close.
Давай, давай. Отход, 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 отход. Ап! Отход!
And that's the end of the video, but the sound of the firefight alone was intense and pretty wild. And every once in a while we do get videos like this, and I gotta say, it is an absolute testament to the bravery of the Ukrainian soldiers who bear through these firefights and continue to push on in the front lines, sometimes a small offensive to retake villages, or just do this daily. We don't get videos of everything that happens on the front lines, and we can assume that this is something that occurs occasionally, if not often, in multiple places, although we don't have enough video evidence to back that up. And it's insane to think that firefights can devolve into this kind of chaos and just the absolute sensory overload of it all. But with that, we're now going to be moving on out of this video from the Lehman area and into the next one, which occurred today, where we see that the Ukrainians were able to destroy a brand new electronic warfare system that the Russians had set up inside of this forest. When you see the drone looking around, a little bit of smoke coming up from the tree line. When you see them hitting the tower of the installation right there. And that is the end of the video. A pretty interesting one. And I gotta say, hopefully that thing was knocked out. Because if it was, that means that the Russians will not be having any kind of warfare in the electronic sector in that area. Moving on from that and into the next bit of news outside of the Lyman and Slavyansk area, and while we've seen this footage, it hasn't really suggested any Russian advances to speak of. We're now going to be moving down into the Seversk finger in general. We didn't get any frontline news fighting in the area of Verkno-Kamyanka or Zolotarivka, but we did get some footage of Ukrainian Su-25s firing off their unguided rockets at the Russians. And so, here's the video. Now I have to mute it, of course, but you can see the streak from the unguided rockets as they're fired in an Su-25, two of them actually, popping out their flares as they fly out of the area. And just look at those fields. That's a very beautiful place right here. It kind of looks like the Cotswolds in England a little bit, because we have seen that before, and it's actually very pretty in Britain, all over the place. And it looks pretty in Ukraine too, in some places like this. Now I can tell you one thing: I'm not a fan of two different kinds of places in the world geographically: deserts and plains. I can't stand the flatness of the plains. There's just nothing out there that makes it interesting to look at. And also, deserts are practically the same thing, just with a lot of sand or, you know, really a lack of anything. Although there are a couple of exceptions, like the Mojave down in the southwest of the United States. There is vegetation down there and some mountains and actual, I guess you could say, topography that actually does make it interesting to look at, like the Grand Canyon. Anyways, moving on from this bit of news and my little talk about topography and landscape, we're now going to be moving down to the area of Kudima, and y'all may have noticed that there's been a major frontline move in this area. We had never been able to get video evidence to confirm that the front line had shifted, but for a while we had known that the Russians had captured the geothermal plant right here that is on this lake, which I'll show y'all real quick, just so that way y'all have a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. So we come up here. This geothermal plant, we had known it had been captured for a while. It's just that we never had video evidence to confirm it and change our front lines. But today we did get footage from the rooftop of a building in Kudima of the Russians firing a cornet in the direction of Bakhmut. So we have confirmed that the Russians did take ground in this area over the past month. We now see them firing the cornet a considerable distance, actually. But we didn't see them hit anything. Notice how they showed that it hit nothing.
захвачена, освобождена, точнее, музыкантами, которые здесь дислоцируются. Вот это все музыканты прошли. Вот это все было под контролем. То, что мы видим практически до горизонта, это все было под вот эти 3 трубы тоже. Они находятся, от них еще 5 километров примерно до линии соприкосновения на 24 февраля 2022 года. То есть прошли до тех труб, прошли сюда.
Also, another thing, interesting point, we can actually see the geothermal plant right over there. So if we go off of that, let me try and find a rooftop somewhere in the area. Let's see where that is again. Okay, so there's like multiple sheds. A little tower in them. This might be it. Maybe? Maybe it's this one. Yep, there's the tower. We found it. This is where they're at. They're actually on that specific rooftop right here. So, wow, look at that. We found the Russian army, guys, and they literally gave it away in their own video. And so hopefully the Ukrainians will strike this area with artillery soon, and make sure to let that Cornet unit know that dirt naps are always issued free of charge.
24 февраля 2022 года. То есть прошли до тех труб, прошли сюда, теперь уже идет продвижение дальше.
With that, that's the end of the video, and we're now going to be moving on into our next bit of news, which is actually out of the Svitlodarsk area and further down the lines past Donetsk, because we've actually covered all of that news earlier today, and in the southern front on day 180, where we saw that the Azov battalion was actually hitting the Russians in the area. And so here's the video. I have to mute it real quick. But we see an explosion happening right behind the Azov. We now see them moving through the tree line. Let me... Oh, man, they always play loud music over everything. Everyone does that in this war. I don't know why. See them moving pretty quickly, actually. And we can also see that they're wearing blue armbands. And most units have moved to yellow. But it appears that the Azov, some units may still be wearing blue armbands. We now see them firing through the trees. See them continuing to fire. We don't know if they're hitting anything, though. We can't see anything in the distance, and we also can't unmute to hear the audio, because then we get copyrighted. We now see them moving along incredibly quickly and grouping up in the tree line real quick. We now see that the video took a cut, and they're now in a different area, and they're moving what appears to be backwards. Or forwards, I'm not exactly sure. The tree line's a little bit disorienting. Now we see this man grabbing an RPG. Actually, he's firing his AK with an RPG right under him. Now we can see him with the RPG. He's now picking up the RPG and then just placing it aside. Kind of fake breaking us there with the RPG. And now we can see them hanging out in the field at the end of a long days of fighting. And fist bumping. And talking. And that's the end of the video. Great to see once again that they're out there having a pretty good time with the firefights. It looks like they're actually kind of enjoying themselves, weirdly enough. And I know that some people are about to say, oh, war is hell. Yes, it is. But one thing that I don't think a lot of people understand is that people get used to anything. And so while you see North Koreans smiling in Korea, although they're starving most of the time, they may actually be happy because that's all they know and they got used to it. These Ukrainian soldiers here in the Azov battalion have been fighting for what seems to be nearly half a year at this point, it feels like, and I think it's actually getting close to that. Let me do some quick math there. Let's see, 365 divided by 181. Wait a minute. 181 divided by 365. Yeah, so it's almost exactly half a year at this point that the Azov unit has been fighting. And so they've gotten kind of used to it, and so they just kind of consider it a day's work at this point. So with that, We're now going to be moving on out of the southern front. That's all the news we've gotten, and while it was interesting to see, we couldn't confirm any Russian casualties, and we also could not see that this suggested any major action in the southern front, showing that front lines were changing. But as we move over to the Kherson area, we can see that on today, on 181, we can see that a Russian SPG was destroyed somewhere in the finger. Here's the video. We can see this drone looking down at this thick tree line, and we can see right there what appears to be a 2S3 along with a supply truck. It's now in the tree line, and they've outlined it with the red circle, and now the black smoke of death is coming up from it, letting us know that the Ukrainians destroyed it off screen, but we can't see it blowing up, which does confirm that it was destroyed. And we see that the SPG continues to burn. And it's another destroyed SPG that the Ukrainians can put under their belt. And so with that, and that's the end of the video. And it's great to see that the Ukrainians are still knocking out Russian forces in the Kherson area, and considerably so considering that they may be lacking supplies. Moving on towards the front line near Kherson on day 180, because both of these pieces of news come from then, we can see a Stugna attack. A classic. When you hear them playing music, we can see the Russian armored personnel carriers moving down the road. They appear to be BTR-80s, or BTR-60s, but they're now about to become nothing. The Stugna is well on its way. It hits, and it knocks out the first APC. Comes to a burning stop. And we now see the second one right here. It appears to be a Tiger armored car. And sadly, due to the glare on the screen with the Stugna, it's really hard to see if they hit it, but we can see that the smoke plume is coming up, and that Tiger was also destroyed. Quite thoroughly, actually. With that, that's the end of that video, once again showing more casualties in the Kherson area. And finally, our last clip of news from Kherson is that the Russians tried to intercept missiles landing somewhere in the Kherson area, but were completely unsuccessful, as one rocket was able to land and hit their target.
Еще одна ракета. Николаев, держись. А, нет, це ПВО. Бо тільки що в Николаев одна полетіла.
You see one missile reaching up into the sky, trying to shoot down the Ukrainian missiles. And we can see that it looks like it tried.
Це ракета, походу. Николаев. Дві ракети.
And now see the cameraman looking down on the ground. Oh, unsuccessful. Looks like we got a little explosion going on out there, letting us know that the Russians weren't able to catch all of them. And just like they say in Pokemon, you can't catch them all. I've never actually played Pokemon, though, so I don't really know what they say.
I think they say gotta catch them all.
Oh, yeah, that's what they say. It's the opposite of what I said. But, you know, in our terms, you can't catch them all.
Еще один взрыв. Три взрыва.
Like a dog pound out there.
Yeah, the kennel. And so that's the end of that video. And it's great to see that the HIMARS missiles were able to make their way to the target and still hit, even after the Russians tried to shoot them down, which was very rude of them. Beyond that, we haven't heard of any counterattacks actually occurring in the southern front yet. We haven't seen the Ukrainians take any villages over the past month here, and so the front lines remain stable, and we are waiting for the day that the Ukrainians will finally roll into Kherson and retake the town. And so with that, we've now covered all of the news from around the world, well, actually, we have not covered all the news from around the world. I actually forgot a very big piece of news that I think our Indian viewers would be happy to hear. A lot of y'all may remember that we were talking about the Indians and the Pakistanis for quite some while now, and we've been talking about why do they keep remaining neutral, and should we do anything against these two countries for not picking a side against Russia. And it appears that India has finally decided that the benefits do not outweigh their morality, at least on the government side of things. And so they've now denounced Russia officially as of today, and they have called, in the Indian government's words, Russia an affront to common security. That is big news. We can also see the news article attached right there, which just confirms the story. But it's good to see that India has finally picked a side. And as far as I know right now, the only countries that have not directly denounced Russia in this war right now are China, Pakistan, Iran, and North Korea. I don't think there are, well, actually there's a couple. Cuba, I believe Venezuela. But the ones that kind of count here in the Asian continent, I think those are the only ones that are left, rather than the Stand series countries. But no one really cares about the Stand series and what they think is they're largely Russia's puppet, just due to them being former Soviet countries and relying on Russian trade, a pretty decent deal. And so with that, we're now finally moving to the speech from President Zelensky, now that we've wrapped up all the news today and there's nothing else to cover. And so, without further ado, here's the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky on day 181 of the war.
Українці, українки, всі наші захисники і захисниці. Сьогодні був корисний день для України, дуже змістовний. День, який показав, наскільки міцною стала наша держава, і це ще не межа. Ми робимо все, щоб сила України, можливості України, свобода України тільки збільшувалась. Сьогодні ми відзначаємо День нашого прапора. І це відбувається у час, коли ми боремось проти найстрашнішої загрози нашій державності. І водночас, коли ми досягли найбільшої національної єдності. Саме тому ми вистояли, бо ми об'єдналися і об'єднали світ навколо справжніх цінностей. Наш національний прапор став глобальним символом сміливості, символом усіх, хто цінує вільне життя, де синьо-жовтий немає і не буде тиранії, де синьо-жовтий немає і не буде нелюдей. Наш прапор є всюди, від передової, де наші воїни б'ють ворога, до столиць на усіх континентах. І він означає всюди одне – людяність. Я дякую всім, хто захищає справжні цінності. Я дякую всім, хто допомагає Україні. Я дякую всім, хто з 24 лютого і по сьогодні обрав шлях боротьби за те, що робить життя справжнім. За свободу, за незалежність. Вже зовсім скоро ми будемо відзначати наше головне національне свято – нашу незалежність. Вже завтра. Ми запланували багато активностей того, що підкреслить, який шлях ми пройшли. Пройшли всі разом, українці в Україні, на всій нашій території, на вільній і на тимчасово окупованій, бо наші люди всюди борються. Українці за кордоном, усі, хто допомагав, усі, хто поширював правду про Україну, усі, хто закликав боротись за Україну. Жоден окупант не почуває себе в безпеці на нашій землі. Всі колаборанти знають, що у них немає майбутнього. А ми всі не просто віримо, ми бачимо, що у нашої держави є перспектива. І на завтра я запланував нагородження людей, які зробили свій внесок у нашу міцність. Це люди з різних сфер життя, наші воїни, це всі, хто допомагає воїнам, це зв'язківці, залізничники, рятувальники, медійники, ті, хто інформує наших людей, хто працює у національному марафоні «Єдині новини». Це комунальники, електрики, водії, волонтери, посадовці, спортсмени, артисти. Ті артисти, кого знають на передовій, кому вдячні в армії, ті, хто зберігає і відновлює позитивні емоції наших воїнів. Я попросив різні міністерства, обласні адміністрації, Збройні сили України, представників ЗМІ надати свої пропозиції щодо того, хто, вирішуєте ви, хто заслуговує нагород у День Незалежності. І завтра нагороди отримують ті, хто дійсно на них заслуговує. Зараз я знаходжуся біля офісу Кримської платформи, біля дому, який символізує, що ми дбаємо про кожну частинку України, про кожну частинку нашого народу, великого українського народу. Крим є невід'ємною частиною нашої держави. Крим – це Україна. Кремли є невід'ємною частиною нашого народу. І ми обов'язково прийдемо у наші міста Криму, до наших людей у Криму і повернемо їм свободу, яка належить їм по праву так само, як і усім іншим нашим людям. Саме для цього ми організували спеціальний формат кримський формат, кримську платформу. Ми провели минулого літа інаугураційний саміт, і сьогодні вже другий. Я вдячний усім учасникам саміту, 40 лідерів, майже 60 держав і міжнародних організацій, європейські лідери, лідери Великої Сімки, лідери країн Африки, Азії, Латинської Америки. Це не просто зустріч, це не просто дискусія. Кримська платформа стала глобальним форумом, який об'єднав лідерів вільного світу. Це спільнота людей, які допомагають відновленню миру і законності для Криму, для Чорноморського регіону, для усієї Європи. І те, що саміт проводимо вдруге, саме зараз із розширенням представництва, це чітка відповідь світу на російську агресію, чітка підтримка нашого суверенітету і територіальної цілісності у міжнародно визнаних кордонах. У Криму російська агресія почалася, у Криму і буде її фінал. У Києві на площі Конституції сьогодні відкрили алею сміливості. Місце пам'яті про особисту силу тих людей, хто не схибив після 24 лютого, хто не побоявся, хто не відступив під тиском тиранії, хто допоміг нам боротися проти російської агресії і допомагає до сих пір. І перше ім'я, яке ми представили на алеї сміливості, це ім'я Анджея Дуди, президента Польщі. Він був сьогодні у Києві, брав участь у Кримській платформі і жодного дня за ці півроку не збавляв сили у підтримці України. Я вдячний йому. Обов'язково сьогодні хочу звернутися окремо до нашого Харкова і усіх харків'ян. Ви героїчні люди, героїчне місто, горде місто, місто з почуттям власної гідності, місто, яке уміє себе захищати, місто, чиї люди уміють об'єднуватись, охайне місто, місто, яке незмінно вражає усіх, хто приїжджає і бачить, як харків'яни дбають про свої вулиці і двори, навіть тоді, коли переживають жорстокий тиск російських терористів. Сьогодні День Харкова. Зараз нашому Харкову не до свята. Так, Харків пережив багато несправедливості і жорстокості, але Харків ніколи не буде містом чорних спалених вікон і зруйнованих районів. Харків ніколи не підкориться цій нечисті, яка не має нічого, окрім артилерії і ракет. Ми обов'язково звільнимо всю Харківщину. Ми знайдемо спосіб гарантувати безпеку нашому Харкову. І ми зробимо все, щоб відновити місто. Я обіцяю. Шановні українці, завтра важливий для усіх нас день. І саме тому цей день, на жаль, важливий і для нашого ворога. Ми маємо усвідомлювати, що завтра можливі огидні російські провокації і жорстокі удари. Збройні сили України, наша розвідка, спецслужби зроблять усе, щоб захистити людей настільки, наскільки це можливо, і ми обов'язково відповімо на будь-який прояв російського терору. Але, будь ласка, завтра особливо дотримуйтесь правил безпеки. Будь ласка, дотримуйтесь режиму комендантської години. Зважайте на сигнали повітряної тривоги. Звертайте увагу на офіційні повідомлення. І пам'ятайте, ми маємо всі разом дійти до перемоги. Вічна слава усім, хто воює за Україну. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelensky here on day 181, and that rounds out our news segment for today and the past 48 hours of the war in Ukraine. If you're new to this channel and this is your first time watching and you enjoyed this, please make sure to subscribe because these streams run every single day of the week except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and we also run Sunday fundraisers. So if you would like to help out Ukraine, there are two ways to do this on this channel. First, you can go into the description below, and there's a link to United 24 where you can support the Ukrainian government directly, or you can wait till our Sunday fundraiser where we pick out a nonprofit organization that is currently on the ground and helping out in Ukraine, and we try and raise as much funds as them as possible through the YouTube Give system, so that way 100% of the funds go directly to the nonprofit in question, and also it adds a lot of safety to it, so that way there's no question of are we skimming any off of it, because YouTube manages all the funds, and I'm pretty happy about that. I like that a lot. And I'm pretty thankful that YouTube has a system like that. And so with that, we're now going to be moving into the question segment and answering everyone's questions for the rest of the night. And also, thank you to all of y'all once again, before we even get there, for just going all out on last Sunday's fundraiser. $14,500. $14,500 in a single stream. The stream, I believe, was like 2 hours and 30 minutes long, and we raised $14.5 thousand. It's the Leaf Spring Army in 2.5 hours. Honestly, impressive, and I've got to thank each and every one of y'all for making that possible again, because if it wasn't for y'all, it wouldn't be possible. And so with that, I'll let Matthew take over with his polls. We'll address the polls, and then we'll move right into the questions. And so take it away, Matthew.
All right, folks, and moving into our final question segment of the night to round out the stream, up first we do have that poll that the enforcer mentioned. And the question is, which of the following scenarios do you believe is accurate regarding Dugin's daughter? 55% of you said Dugin was the target and not the daughter. 19% said death is a hoax for propaganda. 16% said daughter was the target. And 10% said Dugin knew what would happen. Now for me, as I mentioned earlier, I do believe that Dugin was the intended target and not the daughter. However, if I had to pick a second option, I would say death is a hoax for propaganda, just because there's a little bit of a suspicious aura around the entire situation that doesn't make sense. And we know that the Russians have a history of doing that. They have a history of the FSB and covering things up, and also they love their propaganda, as we know. So, Enforcer, what are your thoughts?
Well, I've got to say that I think it's a tough one for me to answer because I don't really know which way it would go, and I always try and avoid conspiracy theories as much as possible on this channel because, you know, once we open the can of worms, we might not ever be able to go back. But just to delve into this one time, I would have to say I think both of them may have been the target, and they were just hoping to get one of them. They didn't really care which one it was. They may have just been trying to get either of them, considering that apparently they were at the same event, from what we can tell as far as the story's kind of coming together right now. They were at that poetry festival. They may have just planted the bomb on the car, whoever it was. You know, the Russians are claiming it's a Ukrainian woman. The Ukrainians are claiming it's some kind of Russian freedom fighting group. We're not really sure who it is right now. But considering that there was a bomb planted in that car, and from what we can tell, although it's a little bit of a sketchy story, Dugin himself may have been trying to get in that car and then told his daughter, I'm not going to go, you can hop in it. I don't know, it may have been either one. So with that, I hope that kind of addresses that poll, and we're on to the next one.
All right, and that's actually the last poll of the night, unless we get an idea for another one. So moving on to our Super Chat questions, up first, we have a $50 donation from none other than Dick Cheney, also known as Will Riley. He says, Mr. Cheney wishes to drop knowledge. The protagonist in Washington Irving's Legend of Sleepy Hollow was named after a Revolutionary War colonel by the name of Ichabod Crane. Though the character was based on a school teacher named Jesse Merwin.
That's actually pretty interesting, and I actually remember watching the Disney cartoon Legend of Sleepy Hollow as a kid. I only watched it once, but it was very eerie for a Disney movie, and it was also made, in case y'all don't know Disney's kind of like filmography history, it was made during Disney's Dark Age, and a lot of their films then kind of had a darker tone to them, and also a darker palette of colors. But if you look at, well, I can't pull them up because of copyright reasons, but if you look at, well, no, actually I can. It's fair use because I'm critiquing the images directly, so should be able to do that. If we look at Cinderella, the Disney attorneys will come for me anyways. Although this is fair, okay? This is fair use of it. So Cinderella, right there. No. We want to find the actual cartoon. Right here. See how the colors, while being dark in the background, are bright up front? If we look at a movie made during Disney's Dark Age, like The Black Cauldron, if I can find y'all a picture of this at all, this is one of the later films made during the I guess you could say, Disney's Dark Ages. You can see that the color tones took a lot more drab of a color. They weren't as bright and fantastic as the 60s. They were far more darker, and a lot of their movies made during this period were a lot like that. And this was also when Disney was suffering financially at the time. Believe it or not, Disney actually never was always succeeding like we think they were now. They almost collapsed during the 80s, and the Disney theme parks was really what helped them to survive during that time. And then they started to resurge later on with movies like Aladdin and I believe the Lion King and other movies like that. And then Pixar came into the picture. I forgot the exact details of the business dealings they had with Pixar, Matthew. Did they buy them out, or did they start kind of like a merger with them?
I believe they were bought out by Disney.
Yeah, it was one or the other, but pretty much Pixar killed off Disney's original animation department that used to make those kinds of films. They had the last bravura, the real Disney animation studios, had their last real huzzah with the Princess and the Frog movie that came out in 2011, which then flopped, and that finally killed off the Disney animation department for good, and it was pretty much replaced by the Pixar department. And while the Disney animation studio still exists to this day, they largely have carried on a Pixar kind of style. You really can't tell a Disney movie from a Disney Pixar movie anymore. They're practically one and the same. So with that, anyways, moving on from the whole Disney story and talking about the Dark Ages and stuff, I don't even know what. Well, yeah, it's the Sleepy Hollow thing. I thank you so much for sharing that information. I've never read that book myself, but I did find the little Disney film that was made on it pretty dark actually for Disney content. So with that, I hope that kind of addresses the comment, Will Riley, and thank you so much, Dick Cheney, for dropping another bomb of knowledge in this live chat. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And yes, thank you very much for that support. And up next, I want to recognize a $20 super chat from Super Creech, who's been around for a very long time. And Super Creech, as always, we appreciate your support and we appreciate you sticking with us thick and thin through all the streams. And Enforcer, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, I would. I would like to thank you so much once again. While you didn't really leave anything on that specific super chat, it of course helps us out a great deal. I know that you have nothing but kind words and great things to say about about us, and I thank you so much for enjoying this channel and always being around and just being in the live chat. And there is occasionally, because I would like to make this clear to some people, there is occasionally some people who come through this live chat and they say, I would love to support you, but I don't have any money. And to those of y'all who say that, don't worry at all about supporting this channel. I'm just happy y'all are here and enjoying the content. That's payment enough for me. Because while, you know, of course, super chats help us to pay for college that we're going to right now, and driving there and keeping the lights on and all that kind of stuff, don't stress yourself out too much. If you can't help us out in any way and supporting us, we will be fine. And I'm just happy that all of y'all are here and continue to enjoy this news. That's all that counts to me. Well, of course, I have to eat, so that's kind of important. But still, it's important to me as well that y'all just enjoy. And so if you ever feel like you want to support but you can't, don't worry at all. I understand. Sit back, relax, just enjoy the show. And I thank every single one of y'all who does support and every single one of y'all who just puts in kind words, because the kind words mean a lot to us as well, and let us know that y'all really do enjoy what we're doing and that we should keep on doing it. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well, address the super chat fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Psyops. And Psyops, I can't tell an embarrassing story about the Enforcer from childhood. That would be breaking OPSEC, as you know. But anyways, moving on to his super chat, he said, I was always told that smoking was dangerous, but I didn't expect the shrapnel. Tonight is the final night for the missile message poll and Discord. Be sure to vote with emotes, long live Robomat, and also Donut Fund. And Psyops, I hate to let you know, but Robomat has been dead for quite some time now. Hopefully he'll never return. And also, thank you for supporting the Donut Fund. And I hate to say it, we still haven't gotten the donuts.
And also, yes, I'd have to say, you know, actually, before I get to anything, what in the world happened to you, Psyops? Have you lost your mind? I didn't hear anything about Texas Sucks tonight, and honestly, that's out of character for you. And I need to know, are you okay? Are you being held hostage right now? Because I didn't hear nothing about that, and you always bring that up. But anyways, moving on to the actual comment itself. I thank you so much once again for bringing up the donut fund. We haven't gotten the donuts yet. It's hard to get around the donuts because, you know, like I don't know how to explain it. For some reason, we just haven't gotten around to the donuts yet. But now that you keep on bringing them up, I'm really imagining the taste of a donut right now. And could you reread the first part of it, Matthew? Because honestly, the whole time I was waiting for the Texas Sucks punchline, and it never came. So could you reread it again?
Yes, he said, I was always told that smoking was dangerous, but I didn't expect the shrapnel. And also he said the missile message poll ended tonight. And also, I will add to that, one of our Discord mods, Susie Halsey, sent me over a message and said that the winner of the missile vote was "You should have listened to Snake Island."
Interesting. And also, make sure everyone, if just in case if the poll has not closed, because from what Susie said, it sounds like it may have closed at this point. Make sure to go over there and fill up the voting booths with what you want. There's a lot of options out there, and I have looked at them. They're pretty good. So make sure to fill them in. And PsyOps is actually going to get a munition with that inscription on it. And so make sure to go vote if you would like to have a say in what's going to be put on that shell for the entirety of the Lee Spring Army. And thank you so much once again, PsyOps, for doing that. That's actually really cool. And also another thing, I never really thought that shrapnel came out of smoking either, but apparently it does. Smoking really does kill, and apparently in a much more literal way than the Department of Health has ever led us to believe. The general surgeon says that it causes lung cancer, but honestly, all I'm seeing is shredded lungs from shrapnel. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one. And thank you so much once again, PsyOps, for enjoying these streams and helping us out so much, both with your kind words and also with your support as well. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And PsyOps did not disappoint. He actually just put in a message and said Texas stinks. So he's keeping the beef alive.
Hey! He's keeping the rivalry alive. Now, everyone from Oklahoma, fight the Texas people in the chat. Everyone from Texas, fight the Oklahoma people in the chat. I like to see who wins. Of course, make it friendly, though. Don't ever get so violent that people start, like, leaving and stuff. I just want to see what would go down, though. Anyways, with that, we're on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from John Dameron. We also have a $20 super chat from Kaltenberg and Sophie and me. They don't leave comments, but John, Kaltenberg, and Sophie, we appreciate your support, and we appreciate you being around for a very long time. And actually, Sophie and me, I think that is the first time you've supported the channel. I know John and Kaltenberg, they've been around for a very long time and support us constantly. But Sophie, if this is your first time donating or your first time on the channel, welcome to the Leaf Spring Army.
And also, I would like to say as well, welcome to the Lee Spring Army. It's a wonderful community full of great people who have some interesting insights. We actually had to do a little bit of a purge on our Discord about a couple of days ago. I don't know if y'all heard about that or not, but we actually found out that there were people from the Great Schism to this day that were still kind of there. And so we had to get rid of them. But beyond that, we've cleared out the unsavory elements now that have been around for too long at this point. And so it's a great community full of wonderful people. They are all interesting, all have incredibly cool stories, and they know a lot. Like, a lot of people say I know a lot, but I hear things I never even knew from a lot of the people in the Lee Spring Army. And so if you're new, welcome once again. You're going to enjoy it here. They're great people, and I hope you enjoyed this stream. Well, apparently you have enjoyed the stream because you're going to help it to keep on running. And so thank you so much once again for everything you've done to support this channel, and also for just becoming a member of this Lee Spring Army, as far as we know, pretty recently. And also thank you to you, Kaltenberg, as well, because all of y'all are legends, honestly. It's incredible to know that y'all do enjoy this so much and that y'all are helping us to keep it running. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and thank you once again to all of y'all for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And I just saw Sophie and me say in the live chat, I usually watch on my tablet, but it's my first time here on my laptop where I can leave a comment. I've been here since day 13. So Sophie is actually a longtime Leaf Spring Army veteran, but this is one of the first times she has commented. So welcome to the comment section. It's a wonderful place to be, and we're glad to have you, Sophie. And also, let's see here. I got a little lost in the spreadsheet there for a moment. Let me find my spot. There we go. So up next, we have a $20 super chat from Scott Mensing, who says, if Russia blows up the nuclear waste around the nuclear power plant, will that cross the line as far as NATO and U.S. involvement because of the potential for fallout over Europe? And should NATO or international troops protect the plant? And Scott, this has been a very long, ongoing debate on the channel, and maybe the Enforcer still holds the same view, or maybe he's changed it a little bit.
I would actually have to change it, considering that it's talking about the wastewater. I guess you could say the wastewater pools, I guess you'd like to call them. Unfortunately, I can't think of the exact name right now, but there's some right here in front of the plant. There's also some here behind the plant. They pretty much all serve the same purpose. But to speak about them in particular, if the reactors were not hit, these wastewater facilities were hit instead, and there was for some reason spillover into the Dnipro, I'm going to be honest with y'all, that's not going to create a big deal because, believe it or not, y'all may not know this, but there is a nuclear power plant in the northern area of Alabama run by the Tennessee Valley Authority called the Browns Ferry Power Plant that has 3 boiling water reactors made of the General Electric BWR-3 design with the Mark I containment. I did do my research on that one because we were trying to make a video on it. And hundreds of gallons, due to mismanagement, hundreds of gallons of radioactive water filled with tritium, which is a highly radioactive substance, was literally just poured out into the Tennessee River about a couple of years ago. And that didn't even cause any concern whatsoever, at least publicly. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission came through and said, "Huh, y'all done it again." Because if y'all know anything about Browns Ferry, this is the nuclear power plant that has come the closest to a nuclear meltdown outside of the 3 Mile Island. And I honestly don't think if that happened, it would create too much of a big deal. If artillery slammed into one of those tritium contaminated pools and it spilled over to the Dnipro, honestly, not too big of a deal. It's happened here at Browns Ferry, and so not too bad. But if it did hit the reactors and the radioactive material just began to spew out into the atmosphere uncontained, because a nuclear reactor is a lot different than the wastewater itself, because it can constantly emit radiation, I would then have to, those two things are entirely different. That's what I would have to say about it. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well, Scott Mincing. We have had loads of questions like that we've tried to answer, each one taking a little bit of a different aspect on them. And once again, I'm no expert, and everyone does have to keep in mind that while I can try and give a best educated answer as to what will invoke Article 5 or not, it's really hard to get into the minds of all of these individuals who will be making these decisions, because each one of them could interpret them different ways, just like a judge would in the American judicial system, because there's a lot of leeway with what people think and how they can interpret certain things. And so my opinion would be that wouldn't invoke Article 5, but take that with a grain of salt, because I'm not one of those key people in NATO that would be making that kind of decision, but that's what I'm kind of thinking right now. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, Scott, and thank you so much for being a longtime supporter of this channel, and also coming up with interesting questions. While that's a question that's been asked a lot, it is still a new take on it. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Vasily, who says, Kvartus is a Ukrainian-made anti-drone disruptor. Freedom Russia Legion is gonna eventually take down some more SUs. Just wait.
And hopefully they will. It is pretty... Wait a minute, what weapon did he say again? It was a disruptor?
He said it's called the Kvartus, a K and then Virtus behind it.
Kvartus. Oh, it's the anti-drone gun. Bring down another SU?
Let's see. So that was actually a separate statement. So he said Kvartus is a Ukrainian-made anti-drone disruptor, and his second statement was Freedom Russia Legion is going to eventually take down some SUs.
Okay, so now to address that first one, we did know about the K-Virtus. We actually saw it as a prototype way early on in the war. We actually showed the video of it. So thank you very much for clarifying that. We did know that in advance, though. Sorry about that. But moving on into the second one, hopefully the Freedom of Russian Legion will take down Su-25s, more of them in the future, or Su-27s for that matter, because every aircraft destroyed is one step further away than the Russians are from ever trying to regain air supremacy over Ukraine, although they never had it. Also, to address something else real quick, speaking about the Freedom of Russia Legion and foreign legions in general, some of y'all may have heard about this, but have not actually heard me talk about it, and that's because it doesn't meet the criteria of having video or picture evidence behind it, although it does come from a reputable source. We did hear that apparently the Foreign Legion, some members of the Foreign Legion, have returned home and have said that they're pretty much looting places over there and stuff like that due to commands from the higher-ups in the Foreign Legion. I haven't gotten any video evidence to confirm that, and of course we need that to corroborate that story, although it did come from the Kyiv Independent, which we use for our casualty reports whenever we show them on stream. So I'm looking into that situation, just wanted to let y'all know, because while I am pro-Ukrainian, I don't let those sentiments get in the way of honestly reporting what's going on. And right now, I'm trying to see if anything can actually be corroborated to that story visually, because as far as the article went on the Kyiv Independent, this was actually brought up to people all the way as far up as Zelensky's office himself, and apparently, according to the article, they were aware of the situation and they passed it on to the appropriate enforcement agencies like the SBU. But still, kind of looking into that a little bit more to see if that story is true or not, if there's any evidence behind it. But I do thank you for the support, and I hope that the Freedom of Russia Legion, if that is true, isn't into any of that stuff. And hopefully it will take down some more aircraft in the future. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and moving on to the next one, we have a $20 super chat from BC Skyman, who I think has gotten off for the night already, sadly. He says, LOL, just felt like you needed some more spam money.
Hey!
And, yes, and I have to say, I know BC's not here, but for everybody else, the spam fund is a fund that I've always wrestled with, because I cannot stand spam, but at the same time, we appreciate support. So I would recommend, maybe supporting the anti-spam fund.
Oh, no, don't do that. No, everyone. Support the spam fund. I eat spam. It's what I live off of. If you don't support the spam fund, I'll eat pizza. That's not that bad, actually. Honestly, that's... Well, anyways, support the spam fund, y'all. And thank you so much, BC Skyman, for the support on the spam fund, because we all know that spam is the best meat out there. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, BC. And thank you so much for playing along with some of our channel jokes. And with that, we are on to the next one. And all you spam haters out there, one day you're going to regret your decision. When the nuclear holocaust does happen for one reason or another, and you're down in your basement and you're left with nothing more than moldy market hams and beefs that you got from Publix that were wrapped up in that plastic wrap that expires within like 8 days, and you sit there and you're thinking, oh my god, if only I had some kind of meat, some kind of protein or something, and then you start imagining up that perfectly rectangular can of Spam with that block of weird pink meat inside of it that's made up of pork shoulder. You'll be thinking, oh my god, I remember back when the enforcer talked about Spam. I should have eaten it. I should have listened. Now I have no meat and I'm starving. That's what y'all be thinking, you Spam hating people. I don't understand why y'all gotta hate Spam like that. But anyways, just getting beyond the joke. Hope y'all understand that is a joke. We are on to the next one.
And I saw Mark Redacted say in the comments, what exactly is the antithesis or opposite of spam? And that is a really good question. I don't know. Something of quality would be the antithesis of spam.
Wait a minute. We need to come up with a scale. Okay, so we got spam. The opposite of spam would be Wagyu. Like, that's like the total opposite.
It could be.
Yeah, I mean, like, that would be like the total opposite of a spam. What the... a Wagyu legging... Huh. Anyways.
Now, I'm not one to judge, but that is an interesting pair of pants.
That is an interesting pair of pants. But anyways, moving on from that, Wagyu and Spam, and then everything's in between. It's either closer to Spam or it's closer to Wagyu. So we're going to have to try and create an actual scale for that in the future, but I still think... Wait a minute. Oh, no! Did you see the poster? It's a World War II poster, Matthew.
Oh, it sure is.
Spuds and
it's
Spam.
Rationing Spuds and Spam.
Yeah, eating for victory. See, guys, if you want to win, you eat Spam. You don't eat that Wagyu stuff. Anyways, with that, I hope that kind of addresses the Spam thing. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $20 super chat from David Moyers, who says, for Matt's safer chair, and ponder this. Pressure switch, she sits down, the door would still be open, and then boom. Ejection from car, lands across the street with intact face and massive trauma. A little bit of makeup, good to go.
That's
and it sounds to me like he is along the lines of believing that it is a hoax.
It might be a hoax. We don't really know a lot about this, but one thing I'd have to say, though, is that there's not a way that could have happened, because one thing that we can confirm about the story is that the car was moving when it blew up. Because that's the only part of the story that everyone agrees on right now, is that the car was moving when it blew up. So she couldn't have sat down with the car door open and then got blown out of the car, because it was driving down the road with the door closed. So still, there's a lot of questionability there as to what happened, but that may be... If we remove that confirmed element out of the story, that may be a pretty decent idea of what happened. And so with that, thank you once again for the support. I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And I just got to say, I typically don't call out bots just because we know what they're up to. But I just saw a bot say, we're stolen valor streamers. And that just goes to show that the bots have no clue what they're talking about.
Wait a minute. Let me spell. I'm going to type this back in the chat to let y'all see how this was spelled, because this was the crappiest spelling job I've ever seen from anyone. So here's what this guy said exactly right there. Stolen follower streamers.
And even worse, his username was Big Brain Bro, and I really doubt that that is the case.
I think he's one of those people from Idiocracy, you know, like how they couldn't even fit the square peg in the square hole or something, because that's so lame. And like, how in the world, like, sometimes I don't even understand although it's just a stupid jab at us, like, you just don't even understand. How in the world did they think that's even going to be believable? Because we don't even claim that we're in the military or ever were in the military. So how in the world are we stealing valor? That makes no sense. Anyways, with
Wild.
that, yeah, it's just wild. You know, that's the kind of stuff we deal with all the time. And then people sit there and say we're scammers or something with the fundraisers. And it's like, if anything, and one thing I got to say about our fundraisers is that they got to be the most legitimate ones on YouTube. Because if YouTube's a part of our scam, then someone's got a fine lawsuit set up out there, because we run it through YouTube Give, and then there's people out there that go, oh, he's scamming them. It's like, I can't. Like, other people, like, people can. Like, you know, if you, like, are running, like a PayPal or something, you can. But if you're going and doing something through YouTube Give, you just can't. You can't even touch the money. YouTube manages that account. Like, there's a page on my channel that is called Give. And it lists off all of my fundraisers and the amount that they raised. And the only thing I can do is look at that number and click edit. And I can edit like the description and stuff like that. I cannot touch any of it. And that's one thing I find really annoying about bots. It's like, you can attack me and say I suck and you don't like my content, but those are valid critiques. Not everyone's going to like the channel. But if you're going to call me a scammer when I'm using the most legitimate form of fundraising that you can on YouTube, that's verified, 100% safe by YouTube themselves, and it's run by them, that's just a low blow. Like, that's not even true. And then you know, then it raises questions in other people's minds about the only legitimate way you can fundraise on YouTube. Is it legitimate? You know, and that's just pitiful, and that's really sad, honestly. But with that, we're now going to be moving on into the next one.
All right. And moving on to the next one, while I reorganize my spreadsheet just a little bit here. There we go. Up next, we have a $20 super chat from D Nice, who says, regarding the looting soldiers, research Ruslan Onshchenko and his battalion released from prison to fight in the war. His guys were the ones nobody would work with and were accused of looting the fallen.
Interesting. Let's actually pull that guy up real quick. Ruslan Onishchenko. Spock! It's Spock! Ukrainian LinkedIn. This guy is a full stack developer. He's a software engineer. I don't think this is the guy. Sadly, I don't think I can find anything here. Ukraine frees...
There's something on RT.
Yeah, Ukraine frees warlord sentenced for torture. But then again, using Russia Today as a source is pretty unreliable because they have the hugest spend of anyone on anything. So, with that, sadly, I don't think we can find any information on them. But if you could give us any credible sources that would have the information on them and send them to me on a DM over Discord, I would actually like to read those and take a better look at that story. And so with that, thank you so much once again for the support, D-Nice. And thank you for helping me to get a little bit more to that story than what I was originally going off of. So that way, hopefully, we can try and clear that up as time goes on. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment. And thank you once again.
All right, and next up, we have an $18 donation from Danny2, who says, please inspect the military photo from the alleged bomber, please.
Please inspect the photo from the alleged bomber. Let's go back
and just for some context, Enforcer, there are many people saying that the military photo on the ID was clearly photoshopped.
Let's go take a look at that again. What's their last name? Dugina. I'm sorry if I was drawing a blank there for a second. Let's see. So we want to find that one from the Daily Mail, I think it was. Dugina Daily Mail. I think this is the one, if the pictures load. Okay, so there's the picture of her. There's the picture of the... It kind of does. Like with the neckline? The neckline looks off. But I can't really tell you for certain because that's a bit of a stretch. Because it does look convincing. But at the same time, I can kind of see where you could say it is a Photoshop. I don't really know. On that one, I'm going to have to remain undecisive. Because I can't really tell you for certain if it is Photoshopped or not. It's borderline. It looks like it may be, but once again, maybe it isn't. I don't know. But with that, I hope that kind of addresses that a little bit. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, let me give a shout out to Jane Chapman for putting in a $15 super chat, and also Blue Flam 777 for putting in a $10 super chat. So thank you very much to both of you for your support of the channel. I know both of you are longtime channel supporters and viewers, and we appreciate you very, very much. And I see a lot of people in the live chat saying that it is clearly photoshopped and faked. And I have to admit, it looked a little fishy, that photo did, although I'm not a photo expert, but to me, it didn't look totally up to par. But Enforcer, what were you saying? It did look up to par or not?
It's very questionable for me because it does look a little sketch, but at the same time, the shading on it looked good enough that it was passable in a way. So I'm kind of mixed on that because it looks like if it was a cropping job, it may have been a bad cropping job, but the lighting looks so good compared to what's on the uniform that it's really hard to say whether it is or isn't. So I'm kind of indecisive right now on that.
All right. Well, up to the next super chat, we have an $11 donation from Mike D, who says, how do you think the U.S. would react if the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv took moderate to severe damage from a cruise missile, including casualties? Also, how would you like the U.S. to react? Potentially activate NATO? ?
That's a great question, and based off of historical precedent, nothing would happen because of that. And the best example I have from modern recent history of nothing really happening as a result would be the raid on the Benghazi embassy, where our ambassador was killed there, and the U.S. really didn't do anything in response over that particular event. We're still engaged in Libya to this day, but it wasn't over that. And not getting into the whole thing surrounding that politically, the ambassador, along with his, I guess you could say his embassy staff, were pretty much killed and dragged around the street for a little, and then we did nothing about it. And so embassy staff are kind of just assumed, embassies in general, while technically being on U.S. soil, is kind of assumed that they could get killed or they could be in the line of danger. And while we try and get them out of there before anything like that happens to them, if it does, we just kind of take it in stride. I mean, like, at least based off of the precedent. So with that, I hate to say that because, I would like to make it sound like the United States really doesn't take crap with our embassies. If something happens to them, we're going to shoot back. And while we have embassy security, and they will shoot back, it's not something that we step in and immediately go to war over, if y'all see what I'm saying. I'm trying to make sure that we avoid the politics of everything here, but based off of our historical precedent with how we deal with embassy attacks and our ambassadors getting killed and stuff sometimes, we generally just try and take a calm approach to it, I guess you could say. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And also, I please ask no one get political. I know I brought up something that's kind of that has been brought up recently in politics, but it's not in a political context. It's entirely in a historical context as to what happened there. In that particular on-the-ground situation, completely removing American politics from the picture and showing that there was not a response from the U.S. government in that situation, and also there was no response from the U.S. government, just to bring it further back in time and give a little bit more precedent than just the modern day, when the U.S. Embassy was actually under attack in Vietnam and we were still evacuating embassy personnel from the embassy right then, we didn't do anything at that point. We just got them out of there. I could probably bring up a couple of others. I'm having a hard time thinking of multiples of them, but those are about the two best situations I can think of. And so with that, I hope that does kind of answer the question away, and thank you so much once again for the support. That was a great question, by the way. We've never had that one before, and that was a really creative, out-of-the-box question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And something I just found interesting, I saw Hoodoo Texas say in the live chat, the first use of fishy was a dismissive term around 1750. That's quite interesting. If that is actually true, Hoodoo, and you're not being like funny or like trying to make a joke there, that's actually pretty interesting. 1750, the term fishy's been around. I didn't know that. But anyways, moving on to our next super chat, we have a $10 donation from JK, who says, if I'm still alive in 2040, I'll be voting for the enforcer for president. And JK, you only have to hang on for another 18 years to get to 2040. But in all seriousness, we hope you're still around by then.
And I hope you are too, because I would love to have your vote in the upcoming 2040 presidential election. I hope to make the country proud. And I think, of course, it seems like the viewers sometimes try and weigh in what's political and what isn't. I don't find this to be a political statement, but I feel like these days the country has gotten incredibly divided on both sides. And I don't care about y'all's personal politics. Both sides, in their fervent, nearly violent tendencies, are trying to look out for what's best for the country in their own eyes. And I think that the political situation here in the United States should be brought back to where it's far more calm, it's far more civil, and everyone understands that while someone may disagree with you, they too also want what's best for our nation. And everyone should feel that way about each other, because we're all Americans. There's only one country to live in. Most people will never get a chance to live in another one in their entire life, and we all live in the United States. And so it's part of our job as the American team to look out for each other and try and make sure that we all end up at the end of the day better off than we were at the beginning of it. And that's kind of what I think, without getting incredibly political. I just want everyone to be better off at the end of the day in this country than they were at the very start. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And also, Magic Sky Girl, you said you will eventually have to talk politics, right? Yes, when I run for president in 2040, but not today. So with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Shade the Knight, who says, keep up the good work.
And thank you so much, Shady Knight, for the support. I do thank you for the kind word. That's a kind word we get a lot, is keeping up the great work. And it's still as powerful a one as any other, because it says a lot that a lot of people find the work we do to be great. And I try my best to make sure that the quality's there and everything's put together in a nice little bow. And I thank you so much, once again, for supporting this channel and telling us to keep up the great work, because I'm going to keep up to that promise, and we're going to try and keep up this great work until the very end of this war. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
All right. And up next, we have a $10 super chat from KG, who says, I love Star Citizen. It's such an immersive game that I don't even mind falling out of elevators into space.
And I thank you so much for the support for that comment. I have never fallen out of the elevator yet, but one problem I did have in the 40 minutes of the game I played is that sometimes you'll click the call elevator button and the elevator doors will open, but you can't walk into the elevator. Like, that's one thing I have run into as a problem, and it's an annoying one, because I had to quit the game and restart it for the elevator to work. But I really do like Star Citizen. I haven't played it much. I've played like 40 minutes of it, and I have a lot of friends who play that game, and they wanted me to get it, so I got it just because they wanted me to. And I'm trying to get into it with them. One of them has one of those big ships that like fit 7 people or something. I've never seen it before. Hopefully I'll be able to play it eventually. But I do thank you so much for the support, because Star Citizen is so freaking cool. If y'all never played a game, It's a huge game. It's massive in terms of file size, but for a good reason. Like it's got cities and everything with little metros that you can hop on and ride, like their little trains and stuff. It's just really cool. And also it's just neat. I can't even get into it all on stream because it's about the Ukraine war, not a video game. But I do thank you so much for the support and bringing that up for a second because it does look like a cool game, and I can't wait to really get into it whenever I get the time. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Herp Derp NV, who says, "Who would win in a fight, Steven Seagal versus Mike Tyson?" And that's an obvious winner right there. Mike Tyson would absolutely destroy Seagal. Seagal would try that fake, what is it, Aikido? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Aikido, bullcrap.
Yeah. He would try that and instantly just to get pulverized.
And also, real quick, just to explain something, I know someone's about to say, well, if you went up against an Aikido master, you get folded. No, I wouldn't. Because, one, if I was going up against an Aikido master, I think honestly, I've got to be honest with you, fighting styles like Kung Fu, Jiu-Jitsu, Karate, I just don't believe in them. Like, I think they're bogus, honestly. Just giving out my opinion. Because I watched that guy.
Well, Enforcer, I will say, I have to disagree with you on that. There are really good martial arts out there, but I think Steven Seagal is just simply a fake.
Well, I'm gonna actually have to double down on this one real quick. I don't mean to be like pig-headed or anything on it, but if y'all have ever heard of what went on in China for a while, and the Fool, if I can pull him up, the Chinese MMA Fool. Let's see if that pulls him up. I think this is the guy. Zhu Xiaodong. This guy here, this MMA fighter right here has gone up against every single master of every single martial art that's ever come out of China, and he has beat every single one of them handily. There's not even one that came close to knocking him down, and this shows that just some good leg work, some kicking, and some punching can beat really any kind of fighting style there is out there. And so, like when people talk about fighting styles and stuff, like, I don't really put too much into it because it's kind of like the whole Indiana Jones scene where the guy was swinging around the sword, if y'all know what I'm talking about, and then Indiana Jones just pulled out a gun and shot him. And this is kind of what this is here. Like, you can spend years getting into karate and stuff, but it requires certain situations, and it also requires for them to be limp nearly. When a normal fighting style with just like bare knuckles and kicking usually does a lot better, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen and also from what this guy's shown. And if anyone's a true fighter out there, Zhu Xiaodong is a real guy, because the Chinese government has tried to put this guy down for showing that a lot of the Chinese martial arts are scams. And he's still out there and he's still doing that. They even stopped him from fighting at a time, if y'all don't know about that. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address the comment, and thank you once again for the support. And once again, I'm not saying that all of them are bogus. Some of y'all may be masters of some of them, and they may work. I don't know, but based off of what I've seen from that guy, he's shown me that a decent amount of them, with a good solid punch, can be defeated. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Blue Flam 777. I think that is his second super chat of the night, so thank you very much for your support. And he says, well, for one thing, the ruble is in trouble. What's the difference between $1 and a ruble now? About $1.
Wait a minute. What did he say again?
He said, what's the difference between $1 and a ruble now? About $1. So it's worth nothing.
That actually caught me off guard for a second, and you're right. It is about a whole dollar in difference right now. If we go and look, I think the ruble's about worth a penny. It's not even worth looking at. It's like less than a penny. So it is about $1's difference. And so with that, thank you so much for the support, Blue Flame. And also thank you for the funny joke. That was a really good one. It caught me off guard, actually. But with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
I think at this point, the Russians would probably be better off just using Bitcoin because the ruble's so worthless. And that's saying a lot. So up next, we have a $10 super chat from D Nice once more, who says, I think it's possible they were targeting Dugin through his daughter. How many people have lost their children in this war? And sadly, probably quite a few.
Sadly, a lot, because one thing that everyone always talks about is that the young are sent to die in a war, and sometimes while things sound bad like that, and it's true, it has to be that way because the young, like the 19 and 20-year-old kids, or even down to 18 and 17 sometimes, they're ripe age. That's about the best physical fitness anyone will be in their life, and from then on, it degenerates. And so you want usually the youngest able-bodied men and women to fight in a war, because that's when they're at their physical prime. And so sadly, with that in mind, especially for the Ukrainians and the Russians, most of these soldiers that are getting killed are the children of parents who are still alive and will hear that their son has died in the war. And so in that regard, a lot of people have lost their kids in this war. It's an unfortunate yet necessary evil of war that the young are always sent to die. It's not that the politicians and the elders are cowards. It's just that if you want to actually have a standing chance on the battlefield, you've got to try and have the primest, most physically fit people out there fighting it, which is kind of a sad thing when you think about it, because the best are sent to die in wars most of the time, is at least physically. But moving on to Dugin, Dugin's daughter may have been the target. That's why I was kind of like, maybe she is the target, because maybe it's to freak Dugin out. I don't know. It doesn't really seem, honestly, like when I saw the video, that he was freaked out. That's one thing that I did notice. It looked like it was just kind of like a joking thing. I don't know, but maybe she was the target. And that's kind of something that I've been keeping in the background of my head a little bit, and that's why I'm like, yeah, maybe he wasn't the target. Maybe she was the target. So with that, I hope that does kind of answer the question a little bit. And thank you so much once again for the support, and also posing some pretty interesting food for thought. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Sweaty Chungus, who says, I have nothing witty to say, so thank you for the support.
Well, thank you, Sweaty Chungus, for the support. And also, I'm glad to hear that you are A-okay. I've never had a COVID myself, but it is a little bit of a tough thing to get through. Wait a minute, no. Wait a minute, no. He has bronchitis, doesn't he?
I believe he's the one that had bronchitis. I think it was Kaltenberg that had COVID.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got you all mixed up. But to talk about you, Sweaty Chungus, because I have not had COVID, but I have had bronchitis before. I'm glad to hear that you did get through it, because it sucks. I bet you probably still got like that weird like cough. Like, I don't even know how to make a sound for it, because you can unless you got bronchitis. You probably still got that cough going on where it sounds terrible, but you feel fine. Because I remember that used to last for like 2 weeks after I would like really seriously have bronchitis. And it was so annoying because so much phlegm would come up and all that crap. It was just unfun. But it's good to hear that you are okay. And also, thank you so much for the support. And it's fine if you have nothing to say. I thank you so much just for being here. And hopefully we've helped your bronchitis seem a little bit better to get through, and hopefully help you pass the time while it kind of blew over. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And it's good to have you around, and it's good to hear that you are getting better as far as we know. And hopefully you won't regress. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Sick Lid, who says, Enforcer, keep your foot on these dirty commie necks.
Well, thank you for the support, Sick Lid. And not to get political or anything, I don't really feel like this is something that anyone would shoot down, but I'm not really into extremes on either ends. I'm not really into communists or fascists. I don't really feel like that ought to be a controversial opinion to have. I think that's something everyone kind of generally agrees to. So in that sense, I guess I will. I don't know. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for the support.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Nurse Sean, who says, Russia has always valued the skills of making dead people look good. Wax and makeup can work wonders. The open casket alone isn't evidence of a conspiracy, and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraine. And also to answer that,
Slava Ukraine.
That is very true. The Russians, surprisingly enough, they're the most advanced in terms of their embalming technology than anyone else in the world. And it's because they keep on keeping that freaking carcass living of Lenin, the Lenin corpse. Let's pull that up. This is what he looks like to this day. Somehow they've kept him in that condition. I have no idea how. They say that the embalming stuff that they did to him is a secret, but I'm sure it's a state kept secret so they can use it on other people. I think Stalin is still embalmed somewhere. Here's actually Kim Jong-il. He was embalmed. Somehow there's a picture of him. But interesting. Anyways, moving on from that, it's really messed up how they do that. And so interestingly enough, a lot of communist countries embalm their first, I guess you could say, leader, because Mao was also embalmed and in his own mausoleum in China, and they kind of create them into deities and gods of their own form, which is weird, because one of the main things of Marxism, at least, is that it's anti-religious, but they then kind of create a cult of personality around their original leader, which is always kind of weird and contradicting. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that a little bit, because they do a lot with embalming technology, and they may have made her look incredibly well, although under all of that wax and makeup that they may have put on her, along with embalming fluid and all that stuff, she may be looking bad. And so with that, we're on to the next one, and thank you once again for the support.
And moving right along, it looks like we have about 12 more super chats to go until we get to our live chat questions. So up next, we have a $10 super chat from White Lightning 777, who says, if the bomb went off before the car door was shut, but just after touching the seat, she could have been thrown dozens of feet away, like being in front of a cannon blast.
That's true, but at the same time, like going off the last one, as far as we know, the car was moving when it blew up. So I'm not really sure if that could be the story. Once again, if she had sat down in the car, she would have still been at the estate, and what we clearly saw is that the car was not at that estate, and so it had to have been moving when it blew up. So while that is a pretty good suggestion, and I did say that on the last one, I think I would have to, and once again, I could be wrong, so take it with a grain of salt. I think I would have to overturn that idea in general, because the car wasn't at the estate where the poetry thing was being held. It was further down the road somewhere else when it blew up. And so it had to have been moving, and she had to have been driving at that specific moment. And so it would have been incredibly difficult for her to fly out of the car and still have an open casket, or even fly out of the car at all. And so with that, I thank you for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from William Allen, who says, did you look up Article 51 of the UN Charter that I last asked about in the chat? My reading is that any member can come to the aid of another member. If so, we don't need to rely on Article 5 of NATO to help Ukraine. And I think we did, William. I think we ended up looking for Article 51 of NATO's charter, I think. But I'm not really sure.
I think we did. Well, let's just go back. UN Article 51. Chapter 7, Article 51. Nothing in the present charter shall impair the inherent right of individual or collective self-defense if an armed attack occurs against a member of the United Nations, until the Security Council has taken measures necessary to maintain international peace and security. Measures taken by members in the exercise of this right of self-defense shall immediately report to the Security Council and shall not in any way affect the authority and responsibility of the Security Council under the present charter to take at any time such action as it deems necessary in order to maintain or restore international peace and security. So I don't see that here, at least in Chapter 7 of Article 51. Let me read through these. It doesn't seem like any of the other chapters in Article 51 cover anything like that either. And so I don't think it says that. It seems like the UN Security Council takes charge in those situations instead of individual countries. But I do thank you for the support, and that was an interesting point, and I may be reading this wrong. So anyone clarify me if I'm wrong. And I just saw someone say, read that again. If y'all like that, I can do a mean FitnessGram pacer test. But I hope that answers the question pretty well. And thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have an $8 super chat from Jonesy, who says, best intro ever in Slava Ukraine.
and thank you so much for the support. And I saw that we actually had some people who were about to go nuts when that intro started. It was supposed to be like Russia Today hacked our stream. Like that was what the video was supposed to be showing. And then we played that spoof song of the VDV thing. But I saw when it started and it didn't have the lyrics playing yet, everyone was like, "What is this?" and like going insane. And I was glad that like stopped because it was just a joke, and I saw that some people were not taking it too well. But with that, thank you for the support. I'm glad you did enjoy it because I had a lot of fun making it. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $7 super chat from Anthony Jeffrey, who says, "You do know that the attack on the airport in Crimea was done with Australian drones, as they were supplied earlier in the war as part of the first package and are SPF specific from Jeffro X Ran."
I actually didn't know that. If those are Australian drones, huge props to Australia for giving the Ukrainians such a drone to be able to do something like that. And thank you for this. Thank you for the information in general. If that is true, for telling us that, because I didn't know they were Australian drones. I just assumed that they were some kind of drone that maybe the Ukrainians just had before the war. So with that, thank you so much once again for the support and sharing that information with us. And it's cool to know that if that is true, the Australians gave the Ukrainians a whopper of a weapon, probably better than even the Bushmaster armor cars that they've been giving. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And up next, our two decoders of the stream did figure out the Morse code, and WF2U put in a $5 super chat, and then Mark Hodges also figured it out. They said tonight's message reads, "May Ukraine's fields become a haven for sunflowers. Slava Ukraine."
And ding, oh, got it correct. That was the only Morse code message of the night because the other one got, quote unquote hacked. Although that was, worked into the stream, obviously. But yes, I hope y'all enjoyed that little tribute I gave to the VDV and the VDV cemetery near Hostomel. It is a wonderful sunflower patch at this point, and it's just getting bigger and bigger by the day. And so with that, congratulations to all of our Morse code readers for getting that correct, because that was the message. And I'm glad that y'all are still here, and y'all are still pumping out the code, well, at least the decoding of the Morse code. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again to all three of y'all for constantly being here and enjoying the little Morse code that I hand out. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from It Takes All Kinds, who says, "Dear Enforcer, could you please give a refresher on the relationship of Russian government and vodka? Viva LSA."
Well, thank you so much for the support. Remind me of their name again. I remember the first part, but it's a long one.
It Takes All Kinds.
Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing you told me that, Matthew, because I was trying to set up a joke for it. And now that I said that, the joke's kind of lost all of its purpose. But it takes all kinds of people to explain the connection of the Russian government and vodka. But just in case y'all didn't know, vodka rights in Russia were far more important than land rights, because in Western Europe, while nobles would want land, like in Britain, for example, you would have like the Earl of, the Duke of Wellington, who would have land holdings. You would also have like let me think, the Duke of Blenheim, I think. No, it wasn't that. Anyways, y'all get the picture. And you would also have French, I forgot the names for them too. You would have German princes and lords and stuff, and they would have land holdings, and that's how they were rewarded with wealth, pretty much. This wealth was through land, which also gives you a good idea of why American, American land ownership in the early part of America's years was critically important, because it was considered a part of being free and having the ability to gain wealth was owning land. Unlike the rest of the world in that regard, in Russia, it was far more important for the Tsar to give one vodka distilling rights than it was land rights, because there's far more money to be had in vodka distilling than there was owning land, which is the opposite of what it was like everywhere else in the world. Yet that's how it was in Russia. Vodka distilling was state-owned, because the Russian government could set the price on vodka to be incredibly cheap, but they'd still make a profit off of it, and they could keep the population drunk, they could keep them subservient, and they could do whatever they wished. That's why when the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 came around, and it pretty much lasted in large scale up till about 1920, and then from then on it was really quelling stuff in Siberia, one of their main goals early on was to get people off of drinking, because in Russia, unlike the rest of the world where drinking was just a bad vice, drinking in Russia and vodka and its connection to the czarist government was, in a way, how the Russian government, well, the czars, controlled the Russian people, because they kept them drunk and therefore, to, I guess you could say, inebriated to really do anything. So as time went on, also Matthew wants us to move on, so I'll try and summarize this real quick. To summarize this very quickly, the Soviet government tried to make people stop drinking in the earlier years, but when Stalin came into power, drinking came back in force. In fact, it came back with a bigger vengeance than it ever did in the Tsarist era, because Stalin figured out, why keep them sober? Because then they think about stuff and there might be the chance of an uprising. Just give them cheap vodka. And so it's pretty much remained that way to this day, and people will still die in Russia in large numbers from alcohol poisoning from drinking too much. So I hope that kind of gives a little bit of a synopsis of the connection in between the Russian government and alcohol. It's been something that's existed through every single form: the Tsars, the Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation as it exists today. And so I hope that answers that fairly well, and thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a $5 super chat from William Allen, who says, "It looks to me DPR was retreating from a possible counterattack, armor firing into the tree line, and laying smoke to hide the troops."
And yes, that did look like the case, and I wasn't exactly sure, but it did still kind of look like an advance, because they were starting to move towards that highway bridge. But I do thank you for the support, and also the additional little tidbit of what you saw and what you think there. And with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from CA Lags, who says, "If Ukraine gets the F-16V Block 70-72, they'd get an ASA radar that would be better than anything Russia has on an operational fighter."
Well, I gotta say, thank you for the support, but this is going to be one of these instances where I do have a shortcoming. I don't know about every single block variant of the F-16, so sadly I can't speak about the quality of that radar and how much better and how much of a step up it would be to be able to agree or not. I will take your word for it, though, because you sound like you know what you're talking about. And I would say that anything in the American arsenal, for the large part, would be better than whatever the Russians could come up with, even if it was the most modern Su-35 that they have. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you so much once again for the support. I'll have to defer to your knowledge on that one instead of deferring to mine. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a $5 super chat from Rizzo Loca, who says, "Do you think we'll be seeing more out of the National Republican Army and the Free Russia movement? It's exciting to finally see internal dissidents brew up."
And it is pretty interesting to see if that is true. And I think if this starts to become more of a common thing, we may see these resistance groups grow. The Free Russia Legion, though, is really a unit in the Ukrainian military. So it may grow at a much smaller pace than the Russian Republican Army. I think the Russian Republican Army would have a better chance of growing to an unbelievable size than the Freedom of Russia Legion will, just because it would be a lot more difficult to get to them than it would be the Russian Republican Army. So with that, I hope that does answer the question fairly well, and I thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Richie MC, who says, "Enforcer, you need to check out the 800 Taiwanese flying mortar drones reportedly shipped to Ukrainian army."
And we have checked those out on stream before. It was actually about 2 days or 3 days ago, and they were pretty cool. They dropped something like 60mm mortar rounds, somewhere around that size. It carries 8 of them. And so it's got quite a bit of whopping firepower, and they are impressive for sure. And I highly recommend, if y'all haven't seen that before on stream, go pull it up, because that is a huge amount of support from Taiwan, considering that those things alone, like all 800 of them, can carry thousands of mortar rounds at a time combined. And with that, I hope that does address the comment, and thank you once again. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And let's see here. Up next, we have a $2 super chat from Rick Cabessa, who says, "I just found the channel and I love it. What is LSA?"
Well, Rick, to give you a quick answer, because we are running out of time, and now you're starting to see why some people go, "Oh, these streams are so long," because it's 3 hours and 10 minutes long now, and I'm sorry, everyone. The Lee Spring Army That's what LSA means. That stands for Least Spring Army. Started when I looked at a Panzer AA vehicle that the Russians were using. It was on fire, and I saw that it had a leaf spring suspension. And I said, "Wow, that's antiquated. Like, who in the world uses leaf springs these days?" The chat went wild because I was totally wrong. Leaf springs are still used to this day on a lot of vehicles, and I pulled it up right after I said that and found out I was wrong. But the chat went crazy with it, and it was so funny to me that it kind of became a joke. And then someone in the live chat said, and I forgot who exactly it was, they said, "We're like the Lee Spring Army." And I was like, that's what's sticking. The Lee Spring Army. And from then on, everyone's just gone with it. We joke about the Lee Spring Army all the time in here, and we are all proud to be Lee Spring Army members because we made it from a joke into like a serious thing that's been a force for good, and it's really cool to see. And so I hope that answers the question. I'm glad that you just found it, and I hope you stay around for a long time. You're in for quite a ride because we're here every day of the week except for Mondays at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and welcome once again to the Lee Spring Army.
And to cover our final super chats of the night, we have a $5 donation from WL, we have a $4 donation from Mikhail Fredrickson, $3 donation from Ed Roycer, and a $2 donation from Lurie Fedoruk. I believe it's how it's pronounced, but I feel like I'm butchering it. But thank you, Lurie, for your support. And also a $1 donation from Architect. So thank you all for your support of the channel. And we actually have one more to go. And it is from William Allen, who puts in another $10 donation and says the training of ops and maintenance and the logistics stream going alone won't get F-16s to them anytime soon, unless they fly missions from European countries that have them.
And that's true, William Allen, and I would have to say that's something that the Ukrainians will definitely have to get a lot of training and development on before they can even field an F-16, because there's so much groundwork that goes into a certain class of aircraft that makes it very difficult to integrate them into militaries like Ukrainians. It's not as simple as some people think, and I do have to agree with you. It's not as simple as like taking an Su-27 and replacing it, because it requires a whole new ground crew, whole new training, whole new parts supply, everything. And so I would have to say it would be pretty tough for them to do that, but I feel like the Ukrainians could manage it with time, maybe several months worth of time, and also a massive amount of support from the West to get that done. And so with that, thank you once again for the support, William. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one because we got another one.
And the next super chat is from Smart Lucker, who puts in a $5 donation and says, "Wish I was here Sunday, but was helping a friend move out to his college apartment. Keep up the good work, you two, and stay awesome. Hi once again from California."
Hey, well, I thank you so much for the kind words. And also, don't worry at all about missing Sunday fundraisers. Like, I know that people want to be here for them and help to support them, but we do them every Sunday. And so if you miss one, you can just come to the next one. You know, like, no big deal at all if you really want to. And so I hate that you missed this one, but I hope to see you in the next one. I really do. And also, it's of course wonderful that you're helping out your friend, because if you weren't, what kind of friend would you be? And so thank you so much once again for the support. And I completely understand why you missed the Sunday, unfortunately. And I really hope that you will be here for the next one. And we'll be able to blow this thing up to the moon, hopefully. And so with that, we're on to the live chat questions now. And thank you to all of y'all who supported the channel and helped us to keep this thing running. And with that, we're going to answer, sadly tonight, we're going to have to make it short because I think, how early do you have to get up tomorrow, Matthew?
Tomorrow? No classes tomorrow, so
oh, sweet.
Still have to get up early to do work, but man's putting a lot of information.
Anyways, I was just trying to see so that way people can understand why I'm kind of cutting these down. But we're going to answer 3 to 5 chats from the live chat questions, and then after that we're going to be wrapping up tonight's stream. And so with that, on to the first one, Matthew.
All right, and the first live chat question is from KADNCEX. If that's meant to say something, sadly, I'm not sure what it says, but those are the letters. So anyways, they say, "Enforcer, I heard Ukraine asked China for their help to rebuild their cities after the war. Have you heard this? And if it's true, what are your thoughts?"
I have not heard about that. That's something that I would not doubt the Chinese to do, because one thing that people don't understand is that they grow through economic expansion. It's not military expansion. And so that is something I would assume they do. Remember, they gave loans to the Afghans, the Taliban specifically, as soon as they got in charge. And so that's not something out of their wheelhouse. They do that often. And that's usually how they get their tendrils in the country and start to control things there and kind of create their own sphere of influence in a very quiet subdued way that doesn't really get a lot of attention worldwide. But still, it's kind of empire growing in their own way. It's kind of empire growing in their own way. And I actually saw someone say that I got political, saying that earlier, but I'm not. When I say something like every country does sphere building and empire building in their own way, like the U.S. has with Europe, North America, and some East Asian countries, every country does that. And I would be amiss to say that that's not something that goes on. It's something that every country tries to do. Right now, the big ones that try and do it is the United States, China, and the Russians are probably the smallest player in this game, and they're probably the weakest out of all of them, and they're doing a terrible job right now. And so with that, I hope that kind of addresses that real quick, and I hope that it also answers your question as well. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Tim and Laurie Spencer, who says, I'm getting the feeling that Russia is failing spectacularly on the military logistics side. What is your opinion, please? And I'll say this before the enforcer goes. I think Russia is failing on every side. But anyways, on to the question.
They are failing on every side, but they are especially failing in logistics. We've seen them place ammo depots in very close range areas that are very obvious. They have not moved them since the Ukrainians got the HIMARS. And now that the Ukrainians have the HIMARS, there's really nowhere they could move them where they will be safe. On top of that, they've had thousands of supply vehicles destroyed. And so to give the short synopsis, it's been terrible, and they've completely dropped the ball on that. Anyone could tell you that. If someone disagrees with that, they're living in some kind of a primrose world for the Russians, because there is absolutely no way that that's all being held together. We've seen it. We've watched it. It's fallen apart in the background. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And we are on to the final one of the night. And so who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question?
And that viewer is Woody Stems, who says, would the Ukrainians get the same American jets as Israel and the Saudis, maybe with dumbed down avionics?
They may. If they got dumbed down avionics, I feel like the dumbed down avionics would just lead to them getting a more inferior class of the aircraft. Like instead of getting an F-15E, they may get a different variant, or maybe if they get, instead of getting an F-15C, if we still have any, they might get F-15As. I could see that, because the United States does export a lot of our aircraft. We are, of course, the largest arms dealer in the world, the United States, and it's nothing to be ashamed about, really, because it's allowed us to create the best weapons on Earth, and that's why we're able to step in and say that if we wanted to stop things like what's going on in Ukraine, we could in a conventional war. So in that regard, I'd have to say they may get dumbed down equipment. They may. But at the same time, kind of iffy about that, because if we're giving the Saudis and the Israelis stuff like that, I would generally assume we give the same thing to the Ukrainians. But then again, I'm not really sure. That would be something that would have to be discussed and delved in the government. But with that, I hope that answers the question, at least the best I can get. And once again, I put out the caveat that I'm not the final decision maker, like always. But thank you to everyone, once again, for all the interesting questions we've had tonight. They've been incredibly wonderful, and I hope you all have enjoyed the news as well. Of course, if you are new to this channel, please make sure to subscribe. We run these streams every day of the week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, except for Mondays. We take a day off on Mondays. And so, thank you to every single one of y'all. It's been an absolute pleasure once again. And I will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to report on the day 182 news of the war in Ukraine. Good night, take care, and stay safe. And to everyone else around the world, good morning, good midday, good noon, good afternoon, and all that stuff. And I'll see you all tomorrow. Good night, and take care.